Once more, we record our dangerous podcast. A podcast against our old adversary, the American Navy. For 40 years, your fathers before you and your older brothers recorded this podcast and recorded it well. But today, the podcast is different. We have the advantage.
It always falls apart.
Really turns that kind of Akbar.
It does. It gets.
Yeah, there's some Akbar.
Today, the advantage is
Ben just getting a loud phone call.
we know that it's a trap.
Is this his best performance? Let's exclude sort of James Bond as
I was going to say, you do know he played James Bond.
Yeah,
right?
let's kind of
films.
set that aside. Is this Sean Connery's best film performance?
It's an interesting question.
That is a real interesting question. I would say it's my favorite Sean Connery film performance. I can't think of another one in the 90s that's this good.
I mean, there's The Rock. The Rock is his 90s performance that's probably the most robust, right?
He's great.
He's great in that. But he's putting 80 slices of ham on a piece of bread. This performance is like measured.
No, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And especially for a guy who like jumps in on like 2 days notice.
True. We'll talk about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we all agree that his Untouchables now win is simultaneously pretty silly and I'm cool with it?
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I'm like, that's objectively kind of ridiculous to give him the Oscar for that. And also I have no complaints about it.
It was a career Oscar.
Totally.
He's good in The Untouchables.
Yes.
He's only in it for like 10 minutes.
Yeah,
That's not true.
He has like
15.
He has
That
like,
is not true.
He has an iconic line.
He's got an iconic line.
He's in so much more of that movie than you
Is
think.
he? I remember him dying like surprisingly early.
No, we were having this conversation about Jack Palance and City Slickers, who was truly in that movie for 8 minutes.
You know what? You're right.
Only 8 minutes?
Malone's got. He's in like half the movie.
I have not taken the stopwatch to Jack Palance, but his character dies before the 40-minute mark.
We just watched Executive Decision on Unclear
Yes, yeah.
and
with Nick Weiger, correct?
with Nick Weiger. And Steven Seagal is in that movie. Of
course.
Much less than you think.
Yes.
It's so iconic that he gets taken out of that movie. Like I like Executive Decision entirely. Like I think it's a good movie, but the best thing it does is kill off Steven Seagal.
Not to go too far.
Spoilers for Executive Decision.
Not to go too far away from Sean Connery, but I will say the best part about Steven Seagal's death in Executive Decision is that it's not a kind of thing where the action that kills him happens and then it cuts to the other commandos and they react. It cuts to his body being sucked out into the air.
Yes.
And it's very funny.
Yeah.
You see this mannequin just sort of like fly away in the air. And I think it's great.
They are on an airplane.
Weiger was texting us after he had done that episode with you and threw to us the challenge of how would you cast that movie today? Who are the two appropriate movie stars? The one guy who's a little overqualified to be killed off that early and surprise the audience. And who's the guy who's kind of the brainy action star with the history and the gravitas to pull off the Russell part? And my two takes were put Damon in the Russell part. Here's a guy with action movie pedigree,
Yeah,
but
but
you
he
can put
plays a guy
glasses
with
on him
glasses
and you believe
in
it.
a black tie.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And then I said, fucking Steven Seagal, you put Gerard Butler in there.
I loved that take.
And it would have the exact same
And him
take.
dying, you're like, shit, they don't have him? Like,
Right.
you need that guy. Like,
I
you
think-
need the muscle.
I think the difference, though, is that even by 96, Seagal was very much on the downslope.
Yes.
But
and
this
sort of
is
had
my
this terrible reputation. But people like Gerard Butler.
Butler's in a better place.
We're not trying to say that Gerard Butler has Steven Seagal's personality or
No.
politics.
No,
that
people
is
like
for sure.
I agree 100%.
Seems like a great guy.
But he did go from being like an A-list studio leading man for a brief period to now being like the king of B movies from secondary studios. Where for him to be in that type of role,
Like Lionsgate has like a button they can press that calls his cell phone, right? Like there's a G and they're just like, get us Butler.
But the other thing with him is like, and his schedule's busy because he has to go to the funerals of like STX and every time one of these
all the mid-major studios that die, right? He's there like looking very solemn while there's like bagpipes playing.
he's on bed rest for not bed rest. He's waiting bedside at Ketchup Entertainment.
Ketchup Entertainment, what are you talking
Big
about?
acquisitions.
Yeah, they're putting out Halle Myers' new movie.
Yeah, we're going deep in the weeds here.
right,
But
okay.
what I liked about the Butler notion is that, like, similarly, if he showed up in like a Universal, you know, like a major studio Matt Damon movie as like the second lead or the fake out lead, you'd be like, this is weird. Butler's usually in smaller movies than this, but he's also always the guy.
Yeah, that's right.
He's never playing, it's never a two-hander, really. Like even Plane, which was sold a little bit as, oh, it's Butler and Coulter. Coulter pieces out for like the middle hour of that movie and lets Butler do his thing.
Also, doesn't the plane piece out? Like they get off the plane.
They get
right?
off the plane.
They get off the plane.
I
really
like that movie.
risky.
I enjoyed it.
Here's my take on that movie. I think Coulter is fucking unbelievable in it. And I'm like really into their dynamic. And then he disappears and he only comes back at the very end. They've announced that the Plane sequel is a Coulter spinoff, which is exactly what I want.
What's it called?
I want to say it's called Train. I'm not joking. I think it might be.
You're wrong. It's called Ship.
Okay. Well,
It's called Ship.
a little more similar
Butler
to the movie we're talking
May
about
make a
today.
cameo appearance.
Okay.
But yes, you're right. It's going to be Mike Coulter centric.
I wanted that whole movie to be the two of them side by side the entire time. That having been said, there's the one take fight sequence that Gerard Butler has that is so good in how messy it is and how they like let him take moments where he's out of breath
Yeah.
and he's like fumbling to like keep up. That shit rules. Have you seen Plane?
No.
Plane has one of my favorite movie weapons. It's like a super gun that when it shoots people, it tears chunks out of them. I was a big fan of that.
I don't think the military should have invented a super gun. Much like the Caterpillar drive. It's too powerful.
This is my other complaint with Plane. You got the scene where all the passengers are boarding the plane, and you're like, okay, introduce me some good character
Group
acting.
one, group
Who are the
two.
fun people who are all going to have their little threads going on? Fucking Joey Slotnick boards the plane.
Oh, hell yeah. I'm
You're
I'm-
like,
I'm in.
I'm in the clear, right?
Yeah.
I'm good. And then Slotnick also kind of disappears.
Not enough Slotnick for you. Well, do your own plane.
I will. It's called Biplane.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a
just them
true
on wing.
two-hander. Yeah.
Right. Introduce our podcast, please.
This is Blank Check with Griffin and David. I'm Griffin.
I'm David.
It's a podcast about filmographies, directors who have massive success early on in their careers and are given a series of blank checks to make whatever crazy passion projects they want. And sometimes those checks clear and sometimes they bounce. Baby. It's also a podcast about dumb movies.
Yes, it is. Mr. Connery himself is here with us today. That's true.
Yeah, he's not going to talk much unless I suddenly feel a lot of confidence.
But he would agree that we all love the movies.
We all love the movies.
And this is one of them.
We weirdly don't talk about him a lot on this show.
Sean Connery?
No. We got another one coming up in this same series.
Yeah.
One I've never seen, I'll say. That's like the one McTiernan I've never seen.
Here's a spoiler.
Take your time on that one. No rush.
I would actually disagree and say make it top priority.
Okay,
Maybe
maybe
load
Make
it
it top
up.
priority in the way that you want to get like tough things out of the way.
Yes.
Like, you want to
It's like
do
taxes.
your chores. Yeah.
You'll feel better long term if you watch Medicine Man sooner rather than later.
Okay.
It's quite a weird film.
I suppose the thing with Connery is obviously we have not discussed his Bond films. And
Yeah.
apart from that, he did work kind of sporadically at a certain point.
Sure.
Obviously we'll probably one day do
The
Indiana
Rock.
Jones. We'll
And
maybe one
Last
day do
Crusade.
The Rock.
Those are the two that feel inevitable.
We'll
for
probably
us.
do some Highlander commentaries
Certainly,
one
if
day.
Ben has to say.
I would love to be on a Highlander commentary.
Well-
Throw that one out there.
Okay.
I-
all right.
I love the Highlander.
Do you like Highlander 2, The Quickening?
I like all Highlander.
All Highlander.
All Highlander.
Normally,
Any Highlander.
I would say there can only be one, but I'm going to allow there to be two huge fans of Highlander.
There was a point a couple years ago where we were recording a Patreon episode and because of scheduling, we didn't know what the next series was going to be, I think. It was like recorded very far in advance. And David and I were on mic saying like, and what's coming up next? We don't know yet. And Ben goes, I have an idea. And we go, what is it? And Ben just starts going like this, like pantomiming sword fighting. And we said, like, what are you doing, Ben? And he just did it with more intensity as if like this is so obvious. And then we stopped recording. We went, Ben, what? He went, Highlander.
Yeah, but bet it's obvious.
As if it's the
I think
only
it- I
movie
would've
where
got- I
people
would've
do
gotten-
that.
If I'm putting my hands up like this in the air, that can only mean one thing.
It can mean one. There can only be one.
Yeah, it can only mean one thing.
Listen, this isn't an episode on Highlander, but now we know
Yes.
that our great guest would be down.
All the more reason to do it. All the more reason to go through The Quickening. That's a Highlander.
But this today, yes, absolutely. This today is another entry into a miniseries on the films of John McTiernan,
yes.
Big McT.
Yes.
It's called Pod Hard with a Vengecast.
Good job.
Although this is another title we could have used if we wanted to. It has the space,
Of course.
the amount of words.
The pod for Red October cast. I don't know. It doesn't
Castober probably
Red
is what I would have
Castober.
done.
It was, yeah.
Hunt for Red October is what we're talking today with a man who I would say, among his many esteemed credits and titles, one of America's preeminent Hunt for Red October experts,
I mean, probably
scholars.
I guess I have made my name somewhat as a guy who likes Tom Clancy.
I message you, I say we're doing McTiernan. You go, oh fuck, a lot of interesting opportunities there, right? And you're texting through them in real time, and you're like, Tired with a Vengeance would be fun to this and that, and then you just go, I guess I just kind of have to do Red October, right?
Yeah.
We didn't nudge you, and you were like,
Nope.
I know I've talked about it in a lot of places. I've talked about it at length. I maybe shouldn't fight this, and I should just do Red October.
Right.
Would you say this is one of your all-time favorite movies, or is it just a movie that so embodies the type of thing you like in movies that you sort of end up going back to it a lot?
I think it's both of those things.
Okay.
It is 100% one of my all-time favorite movies. It is a comfort movie for me.
Yes.
I can put this on whenever and just sort of like vibe out to it. It's
Yes.
impossible for me to try to do other things while watching it because
Uh-huh.
basically 10 minutes in, I'm just like locked in. Like this is very compelling, and I'm happy to watch it. It's also, when I say it's a comfort movie, you know, I've maybe mentioned this on the show before, but my parents were in the military, and they're in the Navy in particular. I grew up on a Navy town, spent a lot of time on Navy bases. Knew some submariners, like some of my friends' parents were submariners.
Namor? Sorry.
You know him?
First I thought I heard name one, and I was like, that's weird.
Name a submariner. Namor.
But yeah,
Easy.
Namor. Yes, yeah.
You basically started the name off.
A very specific and intense job that you have to, like, they put you through a lot of batteries of tests for, right?
Yeah,
Like you're going to have to get used to being in a windowless box
for
months.
For months.
And having little wings on your ankles,
5, 6,
which most people can't pull off.
It really is worth saying they are on those things for months.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But anyway, so it's also just things that are sort of U.S. Navy centric
Mhm.
are very comforting to me because it's just
Right.
my childhood. It's just
Sure.
sort of like the kinds of people, the environment I grew up around. So it's a comfort movie in that regard. It's one of my favorite movies, but it also is kind of an encapsulation of a lot of the things I like in movies.
I was going to say, like, I know that. I knew that, and I knew it was a comfort food movie. You watch it, and I was curious of, like, is it also, would you put it on, like, your personal top 10? Because there are movies like what you're describing where I'm like, that embodies what I like out of a certain type of film, what I wish we had more of. I could watch it any day. Would I put it all the way at my top tier? But this is a movie where you can be like, no, it's a comfort food movie. It's like the perfect example of a genre we don't get enough of. And also you could argue it's kind of like underrated as a serious film. Like it is not taken seriously enough.
I think that's on this rewatch. That was the thing that struck me the most, which is that it's you know we lump it in with the Tom Clancy thrillers.
Yeah.
It's sequel Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, movies I like, but are a little pulpier
Yes.
than this is. But this is in a lot of ways like a quite serious thriller. There
Yes.
aren't
There's very little action.
right.
per
There's very
se.
little
Yes.
action to the extent like really the dramatic arc of Jack Ryan in this is less overcoming any physical obstacles, but just trying to persuade people.
Yes.
Like at every stage of the movie, he has to persuade someone.
Yep.
Until finally we get to the last act where he now has to survive.
There is one gun battle.
Yeah,
at
there's
the
a gun-
last
yeah.
act. But even then, like, I love Crimson Tide, a great submarine film that
Mhm.
came, you know, but that movie is obviously like absurd.
Right.
It's about an absurd scenario, and everyone, its egos are raging,
Right.
and there's yelling, and there's guns being
I
pointed,
guess
and all
like that's
that.
what I'm throwing out as a comparison point.
This
Of like
is about-
Crimson Tide, like rules.
Sure,
Love
it
it.
rocks. Yeah,
Great
of course.
example of a thing we don't get enough of anymore. High level craft, comfort food. But you couldn't argue like this probably should have been nominated for Best Picture.
No,
As
no, exactly.
seriously.
That I think
Right.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Crimson Tide is a pulp novel of a film.
Yes.
In Hunt for Red October is not. It is a kind of a serious thriller with some legitimate somber moments in it and moments of real kind of dread. My favorite, and not just because I love his voice, but when Fred Thompson, when the it looks like an F-16 or F-14 can't make its landing on the
Yeah.
aircraft carrier. And Fred Thompson's like, this is going to get out of control and be lucky to live through it, which is a great line delivery, is a great scene. It's sort of reminding the audience that like, this is all very scary for these people, what's happening.
Yes.
But also it's plugged into obviously what's happening in the real world. It's 1990.
Yeah.
The Cold War is still ongoing.
Right.
Soviet Russia is actually kind of in the state of slow motion collapse.
This isn't even a recent history movie when it comes out. It is a movie about a different side of the history that people are still in.
Right, exactly.
Right. It's just like sliding. I mean, this movie, right. Watching this movie in 1990 must have been like watching Dumb Money in 2023.
Right.
Where you're like, I guess we're a little past this, but also kind of
Not
still
really,
in
almost barely. Yeah.
it. Right. I'm looking, are you doing what I'm doing, David?
Reading Fred Thompson's IMDb page.
Well, that we're going to talk about for an hour. No, I'm like looking at Best Picture nominees from 1990.
Sure, that's the Dances with Wolves year, right?
Yes. I like this movie tremendously. I've seen it before. I did have the same thought rewatching this of like, this movie actually should be taken more seriously. And I'm surprised it wasn't taken more seriously at the moment, considering that like The Fugitive gets nominated for Best Picture 3 years later.
That's true.
The 90s were an era where there was a sort of balancing of like, if you had top level, great movie star, high craftsmanship, adult popcorn movies that punched above their weight class, they would be taken seriously as Oscar contenders.
Yeah.
And this is certainly a movie like McTiernan wasn't an Oscar-y filmmaker
No, what?
at all.
No, he wasn't. Yeah, sorry. I
But
thought
you
that
could see in an alternate universe this being the movie that like kicks him up to like, you know what? You get to make more adult kind of films. You're more cerebral and less actiony.
It kind of is in that he makes Medicine Man after this, which I do feel like is him trying that and maybe not succeeding.
Yes.
The Oscars were just very different back then because you look at the Best Picture list and it's Dance of the Wolves and Goodfellas, and Ghost, which were all big hits.
Yes.
Those understand, and then Awakenings, which is sort of like the kind of middling prestige thing. No offense to Awakenings that they used to really go for, and then Godfather Part 3, which like kind of snuck into that nomination.
Yeah,
like that
was a weird. I guess we have to do this nomination,
right? And then later they're like, "Why did we do that?"
Yeah.
Like but that's a weird year because a lot of good movies, but it's like a lot of the good movies of 1990 are too weird for the Oscars. It's like this, Miller's Crossing, Total Recall, Wild at Heart, Mo Better Blues. Like these movies are just a little too odd.
Every other movie you've listed, though, I agree with being too odd. And I look at this.
This is not too odd. This is too commercial, I guess. Like, I guess that was what they held against it.
And you read about McTiernan. I mean, we'll dig into all of this, but McTiernan read this book early, tried to option it himself even before he ends up coming back around to getting hired to make this at Paramount. And was just like, this is the vehicle to make the kind of movie they don't make anymore. Like in 1990 or in the mid 80s when he reads it for the first time, he's like, this is a throwback, which now we're watching it as a throwback to like, they don't make them like this anymore. Throwbacks to the movies of the 60s.
But I could see this as a throwback too. It's a throwback to the Caine Mutiny, right?
Yes.
It's a throwback to
7 Days in May. I don't know. A lot of those sort of like Cold War thrillers set in the halls of power.
Right. Where it's mostly, most of what is happening, it's just guys talking in rooms.
Yeah. Tense situations. Should we do this? What do I go tell the president?
Fail safe.
I love fail. I love it when guys have to know what they have to go tell the president.
Yeah.
Gentlemen,
yes.
I have to go tell the president something.
The term McTiernan used in an interview when the movie was coming out, he said it's a sort of old-fashioned men's movie.
Well,
there have been very few of them in the last 20 years. It has adventure, and yet it does not offend your intellect. Now, old-fashioned men's movie is an interesting phrasing, but that feels like the real thing. It has adventure, and yet it does not offend your intellect.
I believe the only woman in this movie is Gates McFadden, who you see for 30 seconds as Jack Ryan departs.
And his daughter, who you see for 30 seconds.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, she actually has a lot more going on than Gates McFadden,
Absolutely.
the daughter.
I'll say another movie along these lines, Run Silent, Run Deep.
Never seen that.
I have never seen that either.
That's a submarine movie, right?
Submarine movie, Clark Gable, Burt Lancaster.
Old Clark Gable, right?
Yeah,
That's crusty Clark Gable. That sounds good. Have you read The Hunt for Red October, the book by Tom Clancy?
Many years ago.
Yes.
When I was in high school.
Now, I will admit I have never read a Tom Clancy novel because they have always been described to me as like filled with descriptions of like how to clean guns and so on and so forth. Like not in a psychotic way, just in like an incredibly detailed way.
In the same way that like Moby Dick is like 90% whale facts.
This is what a whale is, except you made him up, obviously, which we love. He's like, whales can talk to plants and stuff. And you're like, sure he can. Well, Herman, yeah, whatever.
Tom Clancy novels are like, it's like half intense descriptions of guns, of munitions, of submarines, and then 50% right-wing agitprop.
Right. David's missing the bigger thing here, though. There's a clear explanation for why you've never read a Tom Clancy novel.
What's that?
You don't like flying.
Well, then
How are you going to acquire a Tom Clancy book if you never go to the airport?
You can probably get them at a train station.
If you try to read them anywhere but a plane, if you try to read them on the ground,
I just
you
remember
will be arrested.
a friend of mine in high school reading Rainbow Six, which is the size of my head.
Yes.
It's a very large book.
Yeah.
And me being like, that's like the video game. Like, is it
Right.
good? And he was like, it's like a lot. It's like really, really long.
heavy.
Yeah. Like, because
And you're like that game 13-year-olds play where they just murk each other and like
Right.
chug Mountain Dew.
like,
Griffin, you just described my 13th year.
Yes.
like, it's not like his books are densely written or whatever, but like, it's just like he just will describe things. I don't know. What is it like? Like,
I believe this is the case with Red October. Tom Clancy had never been on a U.S. Navy submarine,
Mhm.
but his descriptions
right.
of
Yes.
a U.S. Navy
Were so
submarine were so
detailed.
detailed
Right.
that federal authorities were like, are you a spy?
Right. Their response was, who cleared this?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And so, which is to say that the books reward Tom Clancy himself an incredible pedant, and the books themselves reflect that. They're sort of full of insane detail about this world of military equipment,
Yeah.
of military procedure.
Yeah.
And Hunt for Red October is very much like this. It's also, Hunt for Red October, the book is much more hawkish and like anti-Soviet
Right.
than the movie is. The Reagan administration, or Ronald Reagan, famously
loved it.
loved this book.
That was the origin of its success, right? Was Reagan being like, I like this book.
Right. And I can imagine,
I didn't like that book.
I think he said, it's a good yarn.
I could imagine, part of me wonders if the difficulty the movie may have had getting made has to do with just like the political valence.
Right. The book is seen as maybe a little too right wing for lefty Hollywood.
There's
right?
this
Yes.
great anecdote that, we'll dig into all this deeper,
I
but
got it right here. Yeah.
Klaus Maria Brandauer drops
Right.
out.
He was supposed to play
Right.
Ramius.
Fax it to Connery on a Friday
Mhm.
to potentially have him show up to film on Monday. That's the stakes and the pressure and the turnaround of this thing. And he reads it and he's like, it's good, but like, I'm not going to do the voice. It's good, but like, doesn't it feel a little retrograde?
Right.
And they realized that when they faxed it to him, they had left off the front page that explains the movie is set in 1984.
Right. Because it's right. Yeah.
Right. And he was like, this feels like 6 years behind where we are right now.
Yeah.
And like that distance for him, then he was like, oh, it's okay. The space between when Ronald Reagan is like, I endorse this, and the time they're actually making the movie is like, well, now it's a little bit of a document.
But I'll say, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more later, the movie has a lot of respect for the Soviet Navy, right? For Soviet sailors. And to some extent for the Soviet Union as sort of like another world power. The fact that the music cue, one of the prominent music cues of the film is the Soviet national anthem, and not played for dread, right? Played kind of for triumph and for gravitas. I think that marks it actually as it takes place in 1984, but it really isn't. It really is in the Cold War is almost kind of over movie.
Yes.
The Cold War is almost over, and we have a lot more in common with these people than we think.
Well, and there are two explanations for
Right,
what
there's
you're
some
saying,
empathy. Yeah.
right? Quote from McTiernan when he's promoting this movie in 1990, which is pretty wild that he admitted this at the time while selling the film. But he said to the LA Times, I had a secret agenda while making this film. You may think this sounds silly, but I saw this piece as a second Russian Revolution. To me, the emotional heart of the movie comes when the Soviet sailors sing their national anthem. So he's reading this book early, but immediately digging into like, there is a way to actually not only depict their side of the story with integrity, but make that sort of like a linchpin of perspective. And then the second thing is, when Connery comes on, suddenly now this guy needs to have a much greater internal life because you need to justify getting one of the biggest movie stars in history
Yeah, sure.
to play the villain. And he brings in John Milius and is like, rewrite all of the Russian stuff
Right.
and make it interesting and make it human.
Have you read other Tom Clancy books? Like, how many Jack Ryan novels have you read?
I've read Clear and Present Danger.
Yeah, he's got to take down the cartels.
Please editorialize each one as Jamelle lists them.
Rainbow Six. And then there's the one whose name I forget when
Right? That's his name?
yeah, there's a character named Ding Chavez.
Yes, that's right.
That's a good fucking name.
Who's in Clear and Present Danger as well.
Yes.
And there's a book whose name I title forget, but basically what happens is there's a terrorist attack that destroys the White House. It's
Yes.
very like pre-9/11, 9/11.
The book, of course, you're talking about, I believe, is called Debt of Honor.
That's right.
Yes.
And Jack Ryan becomes president.
Yes. Yes.
Jack Ryan's kind of like the greatest Mary Sue of 90s pulp fiction.
What if a CIA analyst nerd, but he was also like, he was a Marine.
Yeah.
Like, let's not forget, became the president, a Republican president.
Right,
I
of
believe,
course.
explicitly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what are Democrats going to do? Get their dick sucked?
Exactly. And it's like it's thrust upon. He doesn't do anything so
His
guttural
own.
as like run for president. Disgusting. No, it's like he was like secretary of something or other, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, everyone dies, so he's the national security advisor or something, so he has to be the president. Oh yeah, executive orders. That's the first one where he's the president.
And he's like, right. He's a hero of brain and intellect, but also he is only played by the most handsome men in Hollywood.
Well, that's what's so
Yeah.
interesting about the Jack Ryan character, because again, envision as not a schlubby middle-aged white guy,
Yeah.
but like the best a middle-aged white guy could be, basically.
Right. Sure.
He's something of a Clancy analog.
The
right?
ideal.
Right. He's
Yeah.
Irish Catholic, much like Clancy. He's he's a nerd.
And it's like this power fantasy. It's like the things that make you unappealing and that make you kind of a butt of cultural jokes are actually the things that make you the hero in this story.
Right.
Right.
And you're also physically capable. You don't need to be, right? And in this movie, Ryan's really only physical in the last like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So you don't need to be physically capable, but you are.
Yes.
And you can.
I'm ready to go.
Right.
If people throw down, I'm ready to go.
I do think Baldwin, as much as Baldwin's something of a pretty boy, Alec Baldwin, the star of this film, is the best Jack Ryan. I like the Ford movies a lot, but they just feel like Harrison Ford is
This
the
is
hero.
The big thing that jumped out
Like
to me.
he has
Yes.
less of a sense of Jack Ryan.
No,
He's
right,
just
right.
like, I'm Harrison Ford, American hero. Like, that's what I'm doing.
But even I think Ford still works in the character precisely because he's sort of like peak middle-aged white man.
He's
right?
what
totally fine
everyone
with
wanted
movies.
to be.
Yeah.
Right. In the same way.
And then with the later entries, Ben Affleck and Sum of All Fears, and then Chris Pine and Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit, and then John Krasinski.
The definitive Jack Ryan.
Yeah,
Yes,
of course. In this Amazon series, I think those miss the point of the character.
Well, they all start to push him more towards a conventional action hero.
Yeah, he's more Borny.
Right,
Yeah. Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit is a terrible movie, but
It's pretty awful.
I don't know. I saw it in theaters.
I like Sum of All Fears. I actually like that movie quite a bit. Even though I don't think it's good, I do enjoy watching it.
I saw that in theaters opening weekend. I don't remember it very well, except for, of course, that a nuclear bomb blows up at the Super Bowl and kills the president, which is a bummer for that guy.
David, I also saw that movie opening weekend when I was like 14
That's
years
the
old.
thing. I was like 15 years old. Like, and this was in Britain. Like, that movie did not move in Britain. It's like no one in Britain cares about Jack Ryan. They might care about Rainbow Six.
That movie had a Game Boy Color game. That movie was just like straight down the middle, summer blockbuster for children.
Yeah, I guess so. And that's the thing. I'm watching this movie about like, guys with epaulets being like, and what does the deputy director say?
I stake my career on it.
I did see it opening weekend. Liev Schreiber plays John Clark in that one, I believe.
Yes.
I mean, this is the thing that's fun, much like the Hannibal series. The thing that's fun with the Clancy movies, the Ryan verse films, is tracking the different castings of every supporting part.
Right.
and being like, how weird is it that those 4 guys all played that same character?
Right. John Clark has been played by Willem Dafoe, Liev Schreiber, and of course Michael B. Jordan.
Right.
In Without Remorse.
3 identical actors.
Which is Without Remorse. Is one of
exact
those,
same vibe.
movies I watched on streaming.
I
where don't
totally
remember what
forgot
happened.
about Without Remorse.
happened.
Just
It
like I saw it. I was like, oh, new Jack Ryan thing. I'll watch this. Or new like Clancy thing. I'll watch
It's
this.
Clancy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's based on a Clancy book. So The Hunt for Red October, of course, it's a famous sort of rags to riches story. Tom Clancy's just an insurance agent. He writes this insane novel in his spare time, submits it to the Naval Institute Press. The person there, they've basically only ever published like manuals, but they're like, well, maybe we can publish fiction. The editor reads it and is like, I think this is a potential bestseller if I can strip like 100 pages of submarine descriptions out of it.
Yeah.
Like whatever is published is edited down from whatever he initially submitted. And as you say, the famous line is the naval secretary said, who the hell cleared this book, basically.
Yeah.
He'd never been on a submarine. He was paid $5,000. Ronald Reagan said he thought it was my kind of yarn, and it became a huge hit. And so the book was optioned early for just $40,000 and churned away and was ignored. McTiernan, like you said, was initially interested.
Yeah.
And this is the 80s. I think this book is probably seen as like a little too cerebral and boring.
Correct. That was the thing. People were reading the breakdown once it had been optioned and was being pitched as a studio film. They're like, well, it's expensive because it requires big submarines and special effects, but it's mostly about conversations and it's incredibly dense and technical. And there's a lot of information that you need to impart upon the audience and keep them interested in, which is like a very hard task. I think most people just went like, too difficult.
But they eventually get the Navy on board. And why does the Navy get interested in being involved with this movie, Jamelle?
I do not know.
Top Gun had just come out and done such great business for them.
They were jealous.
For the naval aviation and all that they were like, maybe this can be a recruitment tool for submariners.
They thought this was the text that would make people sign up to go inside
like
submarines.
the least cool in a way, or at least sort of the least, I mean, the toughest one to want to do is serve on a submarine. I would say
like a pretty sad, haunted story.
Yeah.
Yeah. You talked with Tony Gilroy about this, I believe, on his episode of your podcast. I wouldn't even
Unclear
go
Present Danger, we should call out by name.
Yes. I wouldn't even go in the submarine for a tour. Or would you go into the submarine, say you're making a movie about a submarine, with the top open? That I might do. But I wouldn't go down.
I would 100% go down. I think I could totally be in a submarine. I'm not claustrophobic at all. It doesn't bother me.
Ben's on board too.
I think I could totally do a submarine.
I think the minute they closed the top and were like noises started to happen, I would actually have a panic attack and I would run out of there'd be like a David hole in this and like water would come rushing in.
I would say water comes rushing in. I would say there are few environments I think of as being less inviting and less appealing to me than submarine. And I think I
like boats. I like the water. I'm not opposed to those things.
You know what? I don't like the water.
You don't
that
like the
much.
water.
I don't like the water. I don't think I deal with claustrophobia as much, but I don't like the water. And then being in the water in a tube without windows.
Yeah, I've never been on one. I think I mentioned that episode. I've been on aircraft carriers. I've been on sort of like other naval vessels.
Right.
And those are like in a whole order. That's like, it's a difference between being in a mansion and being in like a tiny, studio apartment, right? Like an aircraft carrier is truly a massive thing. The interesting thing to me about submarines in film, which there are a lot of submarine movies. I think all of them are usually pretty decent because I think it's just like it's a space that is good for creating drama.
Yes.
No one can go anywhere, and so all things must be hashed out. Like people are right next to each other, and it works for drama.
It's like boxing movies where you're like, why do boxing movies have a better track record than any other sport in America? And it's like, because it boils down to two people working out their differences in a physicalized form.
Boxing is literally cinematic.
Right. And like a submarine is kind of like a physicalized version of the pressures of any sort of military operation. Yes.
It's interesting to me that the conceit of the submarine movie has not been used in sort of like other kinds of genres. Like there aren't very many space movies.
There should be more space submarine movies.
That are sort of
call.
Submarine movies. We before we started recording, I was talking a bit about Master and Commander. That's like there's like 2 ship movies.
Yeah.
But Master and Commander is in a lot of ways like a submarine movie.
That's a good take.
Something like Sunshine has a submarine
I would
vibe
say
to
so.
it.
I mean,
or
it's the
whatever.
thing I
There's
love
certain
about that
space
movie.
movies.
Yeah.
Obviously, try to get at the claustrophobia, but no.
And the
I
madness.
would like more.
I think Sunshine,
And
I mean, we've talked about this, but the thing that's so great in Sunshine is that feeling of like, these people have all been stuck in here together with each other for so long.
Right.
And you're starting at this like kind of breaking point.
But like Sunshine is not as much a military movie. Obviously,
No.
they are like, they have ranks and stuff, but like the submarine is also about like, this is a tightly honed psychological ecosystem. Like you really do listen to that guy and, you know, like
there are hierarchies that must be followed. There are rules that have to be attended to.
Which is what I love about Crimson Tide is that George Zunza is like, I have to side with Denzel because like that's what my military brain is telling me to do. Like that's how this should be working. And even though he doesn't like him.
Can I read these 2 quotes about the notion of this movie being a potential recruitment tool?
Sure.
So J.H. Patton Jr. says, Top Gun did well as a recruitment tool for pilots, but it probably hurt the submarine force because we compete for the same kids. So they're not only looking at what Top Gun did with jealousy, but they were like, that actually bit into our audience. It made that shit seem too cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Because that's a fucking comic book movie where the coolest guy in the world tells everyone to go fuck off, does everything exactly the way he wants to. It looks awesome and everyone wants to fuck him, right? And like, oh, a couple less cool guys unfortunately die along the way. He has tragic loss, but he's the rebel and nothing can stop him, right?
Yeah.
And then Captain Michael T. Sherman says, the submarine service has been, quote, the silent service, both practically and philosophically. That will change with Red October. The public is going to be amazed at the technology and the skill involved. Now, what he's saying is correct in that is exactly what's interesting about this movie, but is not something that makes a 15-year-old go, holy shit, I got to do that.
Right.
In the way that Top Gun, you watch that and you're like, I could be fucking Superman.
And the funny and interesting thing is that like Crimson Tide, which is much more, another Tony Scott picture, much more along those lines, is still way more cerebral than Top Gun, right? Like, it's just like, I don't think it's possible to make an action-packed Top Gun-esque movie about being on a submarine.
Impossible.
You can make a fun movie like Down Periscope.
Ben's favorite.
Yes, you could do it down Periscope, certainly.
And that entices people because they're like, I could have a bunch of friends and we could get into some hijinks.
I'm lonely, but if I join the crew of a submarine.
So John McTiernan has long been interested in this movie. He is initially maybe going to make a Flight of the Intruder, which John Milius ends up making. Not a well-known movie.
That's the Defoe
Danny
one?
Glover.
And
Yeah.
It's all right.
It's right. It doesn't really work out. He does, as you say, call it an old-fashioned men's movie, has adventure and yet does not offend your intellect. This quote I like, though, and I feel like you'll like Griffin. He says also, it's Treasure Island. It's the story of a boy who has to go off and find the scariest man of the sea on Earth. And he turns out to be a sweet old bastard. Once I realized that, I had the movie.
It is a through line I love in McTiernan, that whether he's right or wrong, it's a comment across his best films and his worst films. He always has a quote that JJ has pulled up that's like, at some point it clicked for me. I read the script and I went, oh, it's blank. Where he's like, Die Hard is Midsummer's Night Dream. Like, Last Action Hero is King Kong. Like, he's always like, there is some kind of mythic text that I'm looking at and I'm mapping the story onto that, which is kind of smart in this way where he makes films with very complicated plots and a lot of characters. And then he like relates it to a very successful totemic version of the basic core of what the movie is. And then he said, like, as they were adapting the film around this, he was just like, take the elements from the book that map onto Treasure Island most.
That's the thing. They're going through
all of
this
that
700-page book with Larry Ferguson, the screenwriter.
Yeah.
And he's just like, does this have Treasure Island vibes? Keep it. Does it not? It's got to go.
Yeah.
Tom Clancy very upfront about like, I realized once someone told me 1 page equals 1 minute of screen time, I realized half my book was going to have to go, basically.
Yeah.
I made my peace with it. Like, he seems positive on this movie. And also, I mean, I know he's dead now. R.I.P. Like, you know, but
David's pointing to this guy.
I had that thought as well.
But
we all thought about pointing.
Tom Clancy does not seem like someone who is especially worried about his name being used for branding and merchandising.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. I'm sure he was just happy that it's going to be a movie. You know?
How much Xbox do you think Tom Clancy played in his life, given that his name was on like 50 Xbox games?
Well, he liked SSX Tricky, right? That's the one I know.
He didn't even like Rainbow Six, but he did play a lot of Fable.
Sure.
No. So McTiernan decides to do this instead of Sergeant Rock.
Yes.
If you guys know Sergeant Rock, the comic book character, DC military hero, Steven D'Souza had written that up.
With Joel Silver and Schwarzenegger. It was going to be like a full Predator reteam.
Yes. And he was going to make this insane sort of action-packed Sergeant Rock movie. He wanted John Cleese to be in it. Passes him the script, and Cleese is like, this sucks.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of action scenes. And then John McTiernan loses interest because he's like, without Cleese, this movie won't have whatever it is I want.
Right.
And,
Sergeant Rock was like a character and a
humor.
tone and like imagery, but the comics are very interesting, but he's like, there's no core story there. And they wrote this script that kind of had no core story outside of like extremity and intensity. And I was like, there has to be some test for him. Make it a like Odd Couple comedy of manners with John Cleese as like an uptight British officer.
Yeah.
And he was like, if that's the thing, then I can do all the extremity around that. And I think he said that like at the moment they offered to Cleese, Predator hadn't come out yet.
Right.
Where he kind of felt like if Predator existed as a proof of concept,
he could see that.
he would have gotten it.
We haven't asked, but I assume you like the films Predator and Die Hard.
I do like the films Predator and Die Hard.
I think they're pretty
quite a
good.
bit. I think they're very good, yes.
Old-fashioned men's movies.
Yeah, old-fashioned men's movies. As my grandfather liked to enjoy movies, a man covered in mud fighting a monster.
Big lizard with crazy teeth.
Two great dirty men movies.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Number one choice for Jack Ryan, Kevin Costner.
Makes
right off of The Untouchables.
ton of sense.
Yeah,
Of course.
that checks out.
America's
Obvious.
Man.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, he's probably the closest thing to Redford, like the new Redford, right? Like just kind of like, fair-haired, kind of, A-list face.
Right.
He says no. Then he wants Harrison Ford very, very badly. Buttonholes him at the premiere of Working Girl. Harrison Ford says he wants to play the Russian captain.
Interesting.
He gets his chance with K-19 The Widowmaker many years later.
And he proves us all right for not letting him play the Russian captain this time.
Have you seen K-19 The Widowmaker?
I have not seen K-19.
It's a bleak movie. It's really bleak.
Boring. Dave
It's
and
a
I were
little
texting
boring.
about it the other day. They just announced it's finally coming out on 4K. And we're like, I guess we gotta give this another spin, like give it another try.
It's just
Are
like,
you kidding?
Almost
You're gonna buy it?
no.
Shout Factory is going through the effort.
If you fucking buy that, that is one of the worst
There's a
movies
they-
we've ever
restoration.
done on this show.
4K scan straight from the negative.
It's about a nuclear disaster, a real life, so it's a lot of people dying of radiation sickness on a submarine. It's really, really
In certain
bleak.
ways, I do think it's the most boring movie we've ever covered on the show. And it's not the worst,
Yeah.
but it is a movie where it's like stoic Harrison Ford playing Russian, which allows him to go even more stoic. Everything goes wrong 10 minutes in, and then all the men sort of silently stand there and go like, I guess we're all just going to die slowly.
Who else is in Working Girl?
The other person who's in Working Girl is one Alec Baldwin.
Alec Baldwin. And Baldwin's perspective on how he ends up getting the role is, I was at the point in my career where there were 5 guys who had to die before I got the part. They had to pass or die. Thankfully, none of them died. Okay, Alec. Jesus, almost any quote I read from that man right
let
now.
him finish the quote. Let him finish the quote.
That's the end of the quote.
Okay, never mind. It's not that good.
Baldwin, obviously best known at that point as a supporting player. Beetlejuice, Married to the Mob, Working Girl.
gonna say,
She's having a baby.
But it was basically a strategy, right? Like him knowing if he goes up for the leading man parts, if there's a good script in town, all those guys fight for it. He's not going to get it unless they all pass. So his strategy for years was like, go after the more interesting supporting parts in the hot scripts with the good directors and good movie stars. So he'd rather be like color in Married to the Mob or Working Girl or Beetlejuice, where he is ostensibly the lead, but in a way that no one will ever give him credit for being. This is like his first strike at like, let me try the leading man thing. Because he basically...
It's this and Miami Blues, same year.
Yeah, Miami Blues.
Well, and
is
his
the other one.
calculation, he basically said was
Slimy
like...
movie.
Yeah, real scumbag movie. Not bad at all.
The good leading man projects, I'm going to lose to Costner. I look enough like a leading man that people will offer me the chance to be top of the call sheet, but that's going to be in projects that kind of suck.
Or are, like Miami Blues, a little more R-rated.
Right, like Costner's not going to do that kind of role.
But this is him finally evolving to that.
Yeah.
It's like this is after 5 or 6 years of let me pop in the good films.
Yeah.
Without needing to be the guy at the center until someone finally gives me a shot on a weirder film like Miami Blues or a movie like Hunt for Red October where everyone else passed.
McTiernan says he wanted the character to be an empty vessel the audience could put themselves into. And he thinks Baldwin maybe is working a little too hard in the role.
Baldwin himself
Baldwin
also says that
agrees.
today.
I think that's why Jack Ryan works in this movie, because he is a tryhard.
I think it's the one, the reason why he actually has a better handle on him than any other guy.
Yeah.
Because it's that thing of like a nerd who kind of reads as cool. What we're saying about like him being in a leading man's body, him being this kind of like idealized version of what every middle-aged dad wants to be, right?
Yes.
But the secret is that he is just kind of like a dork. Like he's like a numbers dork.
I'm like, I'm going to agree completely with both with this take. Like I like Harrison Ford in the role, but it's Harrison Ford. We all know Harrison Ford is just like effortless cool.
Yes.
That's like his thing. He's an effortlessly cool guy.
Authority, just like competence. It's all right there.
And his Ryan is sort of like, he's a very competent guy. And you don't have to worry that Harrison Ford's Jack Ryan is going to ultimately do the right thing or accomplish the task. Harrison Ford's Jack Ryan can stand up to the president and yell at him in the Oval Office, like in Clear and Present Danger. Yes. Alec Baldwin's Jack Ryan is nervous talking at a meeting.
Right. Yes, and
without the president,
without the president,
just a bunch of admirals.
He knows his stuff. He's smart. He's competent. But he's kind of like a grad student.
Yes,
right. He's like a little nervous. A little sort of like, I don't know if I should be here. I'm going to tell you what I think, and I have strong opinions about what I think because I've read a lot of fucking books.
Right.
You goddamn idiots.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to, it'll take me a bit to get to that point of being resolute about what I think. And at the first, I'm gonna be like, I don't know if I necessarily should be here.
No, Baldwin's take was like, he saw the empty vessel thing as a challenge rather than like what McTiernan wanted was just this audience surrogate. Just have a guy hold the center of the movie, look the right way, hit the mark, say the line, have some basic charisma. Baldwin was like, my assignment is to build a character inside of this. And also because he'd been taking these flashier supporting roles, there's like a lot of stuff for him to grab onto in these other movies where it's like, you're a ghost, you're a mobster.
Right.
He was like, I'd get a script and I'd be like, what's my dialect? How do I dye my hair? What glasses do I put on? And this, it's like, no, they're selling you as the guy. This is your first test of like, you are a conventional movie star. And he was so eager to be like, I got to fill this character with shit. I got to find handles. I got to make him interesting. And that when he watches the movie now, he feels like, do less, do less. Like I'm watching it and saying,
it's a
do
little
less.
more, right.
The fact that Jack Ryan as a character doesn't know to do less is what makes this performance interesting.
Yes.
Because as you're saying, it's like, he feels like the guy who doesn't realize I am handsome and charismatic and cool. And I could play this scene off the way that like James Earl Jones does. His eagerness to like what you're saying, the grad student thing of like show the work. He really needs to like oversell his points.
Right.
And even that scene where he figures out for the first time and starts laughing and everyone turns to him and they're like, what? That's a moment where Ford does that. It's like when he starts laughing, everyone goes quiet and goes like, holy shit, what has this guy figured out?
Right.
And when Baldwin's Jack Ryan does it, it's like, this is kind of embarrassing. Is this guy
whenever
losing
he
his shit?
exclaims.
No, it's a classic nerd guy. It's a classic nerd guy thing. Oh, this weird nerd is like laughing about something he figured out in his brain. Please stop it.
I think he's truly unconsciously playing it like a guy who got hot late in life.
Yeah. A guy.
Right?
A guy. I feel like I knew people like this in high school, right? Sort of like, yeah, you're summer when you're 14, you're playing Magic the Gathering, and then they go off to camp and they come back. And all of a sudden, it's like you've grown 3 feet and have like facial hair now, but
you're still cleared up.
You still want to play Magic the Gathering.
Right. And most of the
still want to play it right now.
They're the group of guys who like have that transformative summer and come back and they're just like, I'm big time in everyone. I get it. I looked in the mirror. I understand what I'm playing with now. My whole style is different. And then there are guys who seem unaware that the outside perception of them has changed.
Right.
And yeah, he's still just playing Magic the Gathering. Yeah.
I would play Magic the Gathering with you, Jamelle, or with Jack Ryan. I have a great Megrim deck if anyone ever wants to take me on. Klaus Maria
Jamelle,
Brandauer.
I just want to quickly say, if you ever feel like playing the Awesome Powers collectible card game, which is my equivalent, I have a complete set here. I have
incredible.
dupes if you want to take some cards with you for the road.
I have a packet of Judge Dredd 95
that sounds
trading
cool.
cards.
That sounds extremely
But is it a
cool.
game? Are there rules?
I don't think it's a
structured
game.
on
I
it?
think it's
Okay.
just trading cards.
If you ever want to take magic mushrooms and
All
just get together.
I'll do that too.
Okay, cool.
Klaus Maria Brandauer is originally who had he's obviously a filmmaker as well, but he had been nominated for an Oscar for Out of Africa. So he's kind of like on a slightly bigger stage.
That is the classic. You get that kind of supporting actor nomination. You're going to be able to, for the next 10 years, cash in on playing
you're
big budget
burly
villains.
European guy,
Right.
like 100%. He drops out at the last minute to star and direct in the film 7 Minutes about a carpenter who tried to kill Hitler. Never seen it. They send the emergency fax to Connery, obviously, and McTiernan basically is immediately saying to him, like, you don't need to do an accent.
Yes.
Like, I am not going to make you stomp around and be like, talking in Russian. Like, I'm going to sell everyone on you as this character just by you being you.
Connery's two things when he reads it are the doesn't this feel a little out of date thing, which they correct. And then he goes like, convince me that the audience isn't going to laugh at me, basically, right?
Yes.
Which McTiernan says the right thing of just like, I'll frame the movie around you and make people accept.
Now, Connery has also accepted his baldness.
Mhm.
He's bald in The Untouchables. He
Yes.
wants to be bald in this. And McTiernan had envisioned this guy as looking like Samuel Beckett, the Irish playwright, and talks Connery into the hairstyle, which I think is iconic.
I think
The
you
wig
have.
is
I
really
think you
good.
have
He
that
looks
flipped.
great.
What?
I think you have that flipped. I think.
Oh, he said the Beckett thing.
Thank
You're
you.
right. You're right.
Right, because Connery was wearing pieces from the beginning of his James Bond run, but because yes, there is no James Bond movie where it's 100% his real hair.
No, yeah, he lost his hair very early. It's true.
But obviously, for like a very handsome, dashing, physical leading man, no one was going to let him be bald on screen. So he was always wearing tubes to some degree. And even as they started to like gray out, go back a little bit, he was like, no studio would let him go tubeless. And then I do think it was a big decision of like Last Crusade,
Right.
Untouchables. He's playing elder statesman
a lot of hat
roles
wearing
now. But when he takes it off, it's like total dome.
Yes.
And as he put it to McTiernan and other people at the time, McTiernan was aware of this, that he was like, I feel like there's a greater honesty in my acting now because I'm just existing and I'm like removing layers of artifice around it. But McTiernan made it a challenge to him. The way, instead of saying you need to wear a tube,
Right.
said, I want you to come up with a physical analog for how you'd like to look.
Right.
And
Samuel
Connery
Beckett.
said
He's the
Samuel
one who comes up with
Beckett,
Samuel
and then
Beckett,
he
you're right.
modeled
Alec Baldwin's terrified once he steps on set, says, this is a good quote. Because the thing with Baldwin is, he could be very quotable.
We're going to talk about Baldwin.
He says, I'm so screwed. I'm invisible in this movie now. This guy looks like $10 million stacked end to end. No one's even going to see me in this movie.
That's a phenomenal. That's such an evocative quote.
Great quote. And it's true. Like, Connery, just the second you see him, you're like, this guy has been in this submarine for 30 years.
Yes.
Like, I don't know why it is. He just really does have gravitas beyond anyone else.
But it is fascinating. I mean, Baldwin's talked about this so much, right? There's obviously so much about what is the actual story of him no longer getting to play Jack Ryan in the further films. And there's so many different tellings of it. The tellings always change, and it probably seems like a combination of factors. But he's talked about so much, like, he gets this part, the part that he can only get if 10 guys in front of him all pass on. Here's the lottery ticket he's been waiting for. He tells the story about signing the contract and getting on a plane, I think back from his test or to whatever, and seeing like 1 out of every 5 people on this plane is reading a Tom Clancy novel.
Right.
Suddenly it hitting him the enormity of like, I've basically just been cast as like the American James Bond.
Yeah.
This is like the part that's going to transform my entire career. And the whole development in the movie is framed as like, this is your thing. This is going to launch you. This is a tailor-made blockbuster, a franchise ready to go. He's the whole time thinking it's with Klaus Maria Brandauer. Yeah, that guy's going to fucking deliver.
Sure.
But like, he's not going
to movie star.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, Connery comes on. And it's just like immediately the poster is Connery's face. Connery's name's above the title. His name is below the title. Everything shifted entirely. Not to mention Connery bringing in Milius and being like, beef up my part.
Yes.
Make my side more interesting.
Apparently, Connery quite scary, doesn't suffer fools gladly. McTiernan said was scared of him, but the second day, at the end of the day, Connery said to McTiernan, "Good night, boy."
Yeah.
And McTiernan realized
That must feel great.
exactly. He
That
was
must
like
feel
that.
great.
I felt very warm. I
Yeah.
knew that was like him, kind of extending warmth to me. Says, he loves movies. We're moving the cameras around a lot, and he was interested by that. Like I think he's like a lot of those stars where it's like if he figures out that you're smart, he's probably going to make more of an effort.
No, McTiernan had like a somewhat new bracing visual and cutting style at that time. And Connery's perceptive enough and like invested enough in the movie at large that when he sees the way the set is being run and clocks the kind of movie he's constructing, it's like, you've passed my test. I approve of you. I respect you.
McTiernan's other biggest casting decision is James Earl Jones as Admiral Greer. That character is not black in the books.
No.
But obviously James Earl Jones also has auto gravitas.
Yes.
And he's in at least one of the Ford movies as well, right?
Yeah,
Is he in both?
he's in
Clear and Present Danger for sure.
because he dies in Clear and Present Danger.
Rip.
If I have that right.
David is saluting.
It's this era of his career, which I love. Field of Dreams is what, the year before.
Mhm.
Sneakers is the year after. Just like him being this kind of like wise dad guy, like in, some supporting role. I love James Earl Jones.
But also in a position of real authority.
Yes.
I mean, this is the thing that we've talked about on Clear a bunch with a lot of these movies, which is that this is like a period where you're beginning to see these like black male figures of traditional authority throughout movies, like cops, politicians, judges,
Yeah.
military.
Right.
And it's like an interesting turn in sort of like who gets to be an authority figure.
But McTiernan's line, I mean,
Not a lead actor.
Yeah, not a lead actor.
No,
right?
no.
The audience don't identify with this person. But if this guy tells you got to cut it out, cut it out.
Right.
in McTiernan's description, he said the combination of sternness, rectitude, and warmth. And it's like, right, that's the whole fucking thing. That like, if it's the guy who's got to listen to what the hero is saying and either approve or disapprove, James Earl Jones has that balance simultaneously where the guy is terrifying and so comforting.
Right.
It's like the reason he is...
Would not want to make him disappointed in me, certainly.
Right. That he's like Hall of Fame cinematic dad as both best and worst example, basically.
Right.
Because you're like, all you want is for this guy to approve of you.
Right.
And when he disapproves, it's the scariest thing in the world.
Now, my favorite performance is Scott Glenn as Commander Bart Mancuso of the USS Dallas, because he never raises his voice.
Yeah.
Like, he never even really seems like some kind of like ramrod captain guy. And that is the thing that feels like the truest to me about what this environment must really be like. His quote, which is good, is that he went on a real sub and he's like, subs aren't like, the way I thought they were at all. Like when you go to battle stations, the chain of command is very formal and rigid and specific, but all the other times things are loose. You call guys by their first and last names. The captain is like a father, big brother guy. It's interesting to think about. Like, is that specific to submarines, do you think? Because they're so close knit?
I think I wouldn't know personally, but my guess would be yes. That it's easy to see how you get that dynamic. It is so small and tight, and you're never really escape from anyone, that there is just a looseness of it. Sort of like you're kind of all bunking together. But because everything about submarine work has to be so precise when you're kind of on the job proper, it just you gotta chain of command.
Right.
Proper
Everyone needs to
hierarchies.
listen to like whoever gives them specific orders, right? At all.
I watched this with the commentaries I've been doing with a lot of these, because I think the commentaries are very
They sound like they're
good.
really good. Yeah.
Yeah,
The one for this is good.
He's
Yes.
a candid guy.
He is.
Yeah.
And like this is one where, and I've seen the old Blu-ray review sites criticize a lot of his commentaries for this, where they're like a lot of dead space. And I'm like, I'd rather a guy who only speaks when he actually has something to say, and then the rest of the time I can just listen to the movie. But he said that like one of his big conceptual gambits for this movie was in the submarines go kind of 50-50 in casting between actors and actual former or current submariners.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And his idea was like the people with actual submarine experience will teach the actors behaviorally. What you're sort of saying, the Scott Glenn thing of like the tone, the sort of control, the focus to make it sort of feel like the real version of submarining rather than the movie version. And then he was like, and these guys who don't have acting experience, they'll learn from the actors. They'll be on a set with Courtney B. Vance and Scott Glenn and whatever.
Courtney B. Vance, great in this.
Unbelievable. We'll talk about him. The thing he said was like, day one, the submarine guys were all incredible.
Right.
And he was like, why? And they were like, we do drills all the time.
Right. Right.
It's a regular part of our job that they come in, they go, here are the circumstances, and then we have to play out like that's happening and play it totally real with stakes. Where he was like, those guys were incredible.
Right.
And the actors actually had to learn a lot. A guy like Scott Glenn is probably pulling a lot from the guys surrounding him on the set and going like, that's interesting behaviorally.
I think it's why this movie's so good. The sets are so good. They're all built sets, obviously, you know, like the sub footage itself is this like murky, dark footage. It's not very blockbustery, right? Like it's very realistic. It's, I don't know. I feel like most submarine movies, like the torpedo launching,
I was
very
thinking
cinematic.
That in the final confrontation, I think in a typical blockbuster, you would have almost like a torpedo cam. It'd always be cutting back exactly to the torpedo, showing you where it's coming.
Right,
In Hunt for October, it's Courtney B. Vance saying 6,000 yards, 5,000 yards, and it's all focused on the people in the submarine and on their skill and their expertise and all of that. Like that's where the attention is, not so much the torpedo, but sort of like how are they reacting to all of this?
Yes.
I was going to say as well that one thing I like about what is like a lot of like quite naturalistic performances.
Yeah.
It's like it's not very showy. Is that when it comes time to go into action, they're all very competent, right? You get to you get to see the captain of the Dallas at the end demonstrate this is why he is a submarine captain, right? This is why he can do this. I think the way the actors kind of move between we're just listening, we're paying attention, things are tense, but like we're not on alert, and then it's alert. Sean Connery does it perfectly when he has to move from what's going on to we are in a combat situation.
Yes.
It's sort of like it's an on-off switch, and it's sort of a cool trick to watch.
There are a couple quotes you've just triggered in my mind, but I wrote this down because I wanted it verbatim from the commentary where there's a moment where McTiernan's like silent, and then he goes like, this really is kind of a throwback, right? I guess movies have changed so much, they don't make things like this anymore. And then he's sort of talking through the difficulty of imagining pitching this to a studio and going through the development process without them trying to flash it up, add big explosions, fist fights or whatever. And he goes like, because it doesn't feel like traditionally exciting. And then he just pauses and he says, it's a silent world of navigation and mathematics and engineering.
Right.
Which I'm like, that's the thing that he loves about this movie, that he seems so thrilled that he got through, of like, it is a quote unquote action movie where there's basically no action. And the actual action is this sort of stakes you infer from the looks in people's eyes as they do the calculations in their heads, which he makes feel thrilling.
Yeah.
Then talking about the sort of having to build the submarine, he said, because a lot of movies, they'll build a set that's bigger to fit the cameras and they'll design things in a way that's more cinematic or helps the story. And his approach was the opposite. Like, build it exactly the way submarines are built, and then we work off of that. And he said, everything is in a particular place in a submarine because they've learned this is the best way to do it. Almost every piece of equipment on a submarine is there in that particular way because somebody probably gave his life to learn that it was a mistake to put it some other way, which is such a good way of like, well, you're saying those moments of silently people moving and shifting or doing a thing with such authority. It's like, right, this is all learned. These are guys who are so hardened by like, there's one way to do this correctly without everything going fucking sideways. And so they built everything exactly that way, where he's like, let's get that accuracy, especially because when we're going to bring the real former submariners in here, they need to know that it's like passing the smell test. And then he said, then they took like aircraft technology, which was a little shinier and flashier and cooler looking, and used that to like perk up everything the way it was. And then the real submariners come in and like start freaking out. What was it? What's the line here? The irony was when some of the Navy brass came and were visiting the set, they looked around and they asked 2 or 3 times how we arrived at these changes in the set. I explained that we just applied aircraft technology instead of shipbuilding technology. They sort of relaxed at that point and then explained to me that that was exactly what they had done in the design of the Seawolf submarine that they were just turning out the first copy of.
Oh, yeah.
It was supposed to be super secret at that point, and we stumbled into it. They thought they had a leak or something.
Wow.
How fucking cool is that? That multiple times across the development of this book and this movie, people were like, who's the fucking mole? Who is the spy who's blowing this for everybody?
Wow, there's only 3 Seawolf submarines. They're supposed to build 29, and then the Cold War ended.
I want to say it's a cool name.
It is cool.
It's very cool.
Yeah, it's cooler than Ohio class or whatever. No offense to Ohio.
How many nuclear submarines the United States
This is a
have?
very
How do we
good
like?
question.
How many do we currently have running?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
We're talking before about what's scary about submarines, and it was all just like the psychology of living inside of it. That's the other thing. You're living inside like a silo underwater filled with nuclear power.
True.
Yeah, I mean, when you kind of zoom out and think about what we built, a nuclear submarine is a virtually silent machine.
Yep.
That can launch weapons that end the world and no one would know until it was too late.
Correct. And it's also simultaneously almost as effective at breaking men's spirits and minds. Like it's like a psychological torture device if not managed properly.
And you know, there's these like there's the USS Scorpion, there's K-129, there's these nuclear submarines that we lost that we don't know why.
I have a couple of them.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
You know, cool conspiratorial. They're so mysterious and strange, nuclear subs, because they can just go down there. I mean, that's how this movie ends. Is Stellan Skarsgård blows up.
Yeah.
And no one's going to really be able to check on what happened there because it would be too hard.
Right.
And that's how they get away with it.
Yeah, you can't go too deep.
So the film begins with Marco Ramius.
Yes. It opens with a really tight close-up on the eyes of a man who is about to steal the entire movie out from Alec Baldwin's nose.
That's true.
Like it's what Baldwin's talking about of like this movie just knows where the money is now.
I won't be letting it go.
Yes.
He is the captain of the Red October, which is a Typhoon class submarine with a Caterpillar drive. Now, the Caterpillar drive is the thing that is fake. Yes, that is the thing that is fanciful.
Okay.
Like Typhoon class submarines are real,
Mhm.
but I do not believe Caterpillar drives are real at this time.
I don't-
Maybe at all.
I don't think. Yeah, I don't think so. And Red October named, of course, for the October Revolution of
Yes.
1917.
Cool name. Great name.
We also should call out that before the Connery shot, you get the super titles of like officially none of this ever really happened.
Yes.
Which is like the movie prefacing itself with the joke of what we talked about just kept happening, where they're like, yeah, this isn't leaked.
Yeah, right. It's true. They really lean into it
Right.
because they know how realistic it feels,
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah.
And like, what I love is that like you basically piece together what Ramius is doing for the whole movie, but he doesn't really say it aloud until right at the end, which is basically like, this thing is too powerful to exist.
Yeah.
So I just don't want this to be in charge of this.
Yeah.
And yes, there's these supplemental motivations he has. His wife died at the hands of somebody who was then protected by the state, right? For like patronage reasons or whatever. He's Lithuanian, which they underline. So he's not like ethnically Russian. So maybe he's a little less loyal to the motherland.
I don't know if this is your memory, Jamelle, but McTiernan said that was one of the big things in adapting. I think there's a quote from Ferguson about this as well.
They needed to give him a little more.
Right. The book, it's like those two things first and foremost. Why is this guy defecting? It's because he doesn't really care that much about Russia because that's not really his birthright. And also his wife died and now he's kind of going through an emotional crisis. The sort of principle of it is something that really got added for the movie, right?
Which gets to something I was pointing out earlier, which is how much like respect and empathy this movie has for Soviet soldiers. I mean, that whole notion that Ramius is doing this as much because he just doesn't think the submarine should exist. Yeah, it's too dangerous. It's sort of like it's essentially saying to an American audience, like, listen, these people aren't maniacs, right? Like these are honorable, decent people who live under a different system. And don't think that we should be trying to murder us as well.
Right, which is like, considering that not just most other fiction at the time, but the news is largely depicting these people as like cackling James Bond villain maniacs.
Right.
And instead now you have James Bond playing him
True.
as a man who's like really thinking about like the moral weight of responsibility to mankind.
There's the singing, as you mentioned, like the sense of camaraderie in the boat feels real.
Mhm.
Like they don't feel like a bunch of stooges or maniacs.
I'm also going to say all the Russian sailors have great faces.
Oh,
Everyone I feel like was cast for having that kind of a face, right? Obviously, the supporting cast here on the boat is Sam Neill and Tim Curry and Thomas Arana.
but you can't just quietly go, of course. The supporting cast on this Russian
but I'm
submarine
saying, like,
is
even-
Sam Neill and Tim Curry.
But even the tertiary faces are good.
Yeah.
Like, those are great faces.
No, I agree, but I'm just like, the fact that this movie is just throwing those kinds of ingredients in the pot casually over its shoulder in every scene.
Well, so like obviously Tim Curry, like Rocky Horror is, from long ago,
Yeah.
Annie, Clue, Legend. Like he's a guy.
He's a real guy.
Sam
Yeah.
Neill, I feel like he's really been around for a while too.
But Jurassic Park isn't out yet.
No.
No,
No?
that's 3
And he
years
hasn't done the
later.
Carpenter movies
Yeah.
yet.
But he has done like Dead Calm and
Yeah.
Cry in the Dark and Omen 3 and like Possession. And he's been
Yeah.
he's a noted New Zealand actor, I
Yes.
guess.
But also did a lot of Australian film,
Yeah,
which is
well,
why people mistakenly think he's Australian.
He's both or whatever. There's I think he lived in
Oh,
Australia
David,
for a
people don't
long
like
time.
us making
It's a
assumptions.
good point. I think
I dated a Kiwi through college. They really don't like it.
Yeah.
I believe he lived in Australia for a long time, but I'm not actually sure.
Well, no, and
It's
he
all
clearly
over
he did a lot of work there and
Yes.
was strongly associated with a lot of Australian
I
filmmakers.
think he currently owns. Does he have a sheep farm? He's always posting from a farm.
Yes.
He
And
once dunked on me on Twitter.
really?
Really?
Yeah.
For what?
I think I said something about how his neckerchief in Jurassic Park. I said I love it. It's
Yeah.
just silly, and then he dunked on me.
It's not silly.
I was proud to have attracted the negative
Yeah.
attention of Sam Neill.
Yeah, he's got like a big farm, and he's always Instagramming from it. Looks pretty cool.
I think it's also a winery. It's like a vineyard,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I'd love
He's
to go hang
one
out
of those
with him.
guys.
He's very cool.
When I look at old Sam Neill social media, dunking on Jamelle inside, I do think like that seems to be a guy who's got to figure out. I look at him and I'm like, I think that guy's got it figured out to a T.
He does seem pretty no bullshit.
Yeah.
Does not seem too affected by massive fame.
By
Certainly.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first thing this guy does, Ramius,
Mhm.
obviously we're on his side because he's Sean Connery.
Yeah.
But still, the first thing he does is he sits down with Peter Firth, great actor
Mhm.
from Equus, and just kills his ass.
Murders,
Yeah.
Just
murders
dead.
the man.
Just like
Yeah.
without mercy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite scenes in the movie is when he's telling the officers this, and one of them's like, "We should have at least discussed this."
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is a fair point. And obviously, I assume his opinion is kind of like you would have said no, or you would have felt culpable, right? Me just doing it is the correct way to do it.
Let's also call out the character's name is First Lieutenant Putin. So anytime in the movie they go, Putin is dead, you go like, God, wouldn't that be nice? What a nice world.
Well, what's funny about it
this
too is
movie
that
lives in.
Putin was an intelligence officer.
Yeah.
He was a political officer. I mean,
Yes, he was. He was this kind of person.
He was
Yeah.
this kind of guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just a sliding door opportunity. If only Sean Connery had gotten his hands on him early, we'd live in a very different reality.
He presents the lie that he slipped on his tea.
Correct.
Yeah. After he kills him, he dumps the tea on the ground and kind of puts some sprinkles some on the body like it's crack, and then
No need to investigate this.
Loose leaves. This guy was a junkie.
It feels a little. Obviously, I know his officers are in on this with him in some form, but still, it's a little clean. But I guess he's also just got the advantage of like, it's a submarine. Who's gonna fucking come get me?
But also, you were talking about the military brain thing, especially
Yeah.
if you're in a submarine and you're just like hermetically sealed with these people for months at a time. You're just like, if he's saying it, I guess that's right.
yeah. Are you really going to challenge your storied
Right.
commander?
Right.
Especially
on
if
this.
he's got this energy,
Yeah.
this amount of presence and command.
But it's just like the fascinating thing of like their orders are not to go and nuke America.
Mhm.
It's not like this is some crisis point from which there is no turning back.
No.
It's just like take your fancy new submarine and do missile drills.
Right.
It's scary,
Yeah.
but Connery is already of the mindset of like, no, this is gonna ruin the
We
world.
must destroy Skynet.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
We must. So then he leaves with his sub.
Mhm.
And I guess he's near the Dallas Or the Dallas has maybe been shadowing him and then he just disappears. The sub
Yeah.
just disappears. And that's what gets everyone excited, right?
Yes.
That a sub has disappeared off the map.
But this is what's great. I categorize this movie in my mind all the time as an action movie. And then when I rewatch it, I'm like, this is a chess movie,
Yeah.
right? This
There
is
you
a
go.
movie of like 3 different parties all trying to read the intent of what the other party is doing.
Right.
Silently without really having clear lines of communication.
Right. Now, Connery has helped matters by sending a letter to his buddy in Russia being like, hi, FYI, plan to defect.
Yes.
America great, you
Right.
stinky.
Right.
Like,
But that
see you
guy
later.
doesn't want to tell the fucking Americans that.
Right.
Like anyone who has information in this movie is being very selective about who they share it with. And then there are a lot of theories that people are trying to convince other people of. I mean, there's the fucking Roger Ebert just like raining threes left
Be
and
fun
right
if Roger Ebert
from
was in
beyond the
this,
grave.
Yeah.
But what is the line here? He says, this is from his review of the film, 3.5 stars. He said, the movies have one sure way of involving us that never fails. They give us a character who is right when everybody else is wrong, and then invite us to share his frustration as he tries to talk some sense into the blockheads.
Yes. He is.
Roger, perfectly said.
Jack is at a table
Always satisfying.
with a bunch of hard-nosed American military men who
Yes.
are like, wow, we got to blow this guy up, right?
Right.
Like, but you understand why they're concerned. I don't know. Like,
Yes.
right?
Right. I mean,
yeah.
that's. I think that's what makes it work as well. Like, it's not as if their response is unreasonable,
No.
right?
No.
And that's
yeah.
that's what also provides like the necessary friction for this to be dramatically satisfying. Like they have their perspective is 100% reasonable. You're telling me there's a high tech rogue Russian nuclear sub
right. That
heading
may
to
be
the
coming
United
right
States.
at us. Exactly.
And
Like-
he's
Yeah.
making huge extrapolations. Like his aha moment is, oh my God, it's the 1-year anniversary of his wife's death.
right.
What
And
the
they're like-
fuck are you talking
You
about?
can't jump to this shit, my man. And then
it's
yes,
true.
that like nervy, like Jack Ryan energy of him being like, no, you don't understand. Listen to me. And like doing all his Alec Baldwin business is more a reason they wouldn't trust him. Because as an actor, he's overselling it.
That's why one of the best scenes of the film is him with Fred Thompson and the other guy.
Fred Thompson, who should have won all 4 acting categories at the Oscars.
He should have won
1990.
everything except for the presidential nomination, which he
Correct.
never did win.
No, that's the
They
only
would have
thing.
created a new Oscar category for most buttery accent in a
I
film.
got his fucking cigarette work in this
I want
movie.
him to hand me a hot chicken sandwich.
This is like
It's so good.
this is my body dysmorphia. As I watch this movie, his first scene, I go, God, that's exactly how I want to look. This is the energy I want to have in rooms. I want to sit back.
wanna
with
look
my
like
fucking
Smokey the Bear
gut
without
and
hair?
hold a cigarette up like this and go, hey, listen to me here.
Look,
This is good
Fred
going on."
Thompson's an awesome actor. I mean, he could do like one thing, which
Yeah.
is this,
Yeah, yeah,
but he's always did it well. When he was in Law and Order, so he's after. So it was who was it? Right, like he's the third DA, maybe.
Okay.
It's like Diane Weiss comes in for a couple years to
Right.
replace Stephen Hill.
Yeah.
And she's good, but you know, Diane Weiss, she's sort of an A player. She moves on. He comes in and the idea it's the Bush era and he's more conservative.
Yeah.
He had juice on that
Oh,
show.
Yeah.
The man
Like-
had shoes.
And then he decides to leave Law and Order to run for president like a fucking moron. No one cares.
Classic rookie move.
But when he's talking to Jack Ryan with the other guy, I forget who the other guy is.
Yeah.
But the guy
Just
who doesn't like Jack Ryan.
Just some guy.
Some
yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Jack Ryan leaves, and the other guy is like, that guy sucks. Like, he's so annoying. Like,
Yeah.
you know, he thinks he knows everything. And Fred Thompson reads him to kind of like, look, served in the Marines, like injured, like learn to walk again, basically. Like, this guy is tougher than you think.
Yeah.
You're just all in on Jack Ryan after
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah,
Because of
100%.
Fred Thompson.
The endorsement. Just to clarify, I don't wish I looked like Fred Thompson when I'm like on dates or at the supermarket.
Maybe you do.
But I look at this movie and I'm like, I wish I could do that as an actor. And 50% of that is just rolling in with that look. With like that look and that voice and just being like, I'm the guy behind the desk.
To be clear, he was an actual politician, right? He
Yeah.
served on
No,
Watergate.
he let me look this up. I believe
He was
actually-
White House counsel, or he was not White House. He was he was the Republican counsel.
he served
for
in the
Watergate.
Senate.
Well, he was in the Senate in the 90s.
Right.
So after this movie, it's a weird career. He's like a Republican lawyer
Uh-huh.
who works. He's part of the Watergate committee, which
Sure.
is like what he's most famous for.
Yeah.
Becomes a lobbyist. Somebody is like, you really could fucking just slot into some admiral role in my
Yes.
movie.
Right.
He does that for like 10 years, and then someone's like, you have senator vibes. You want to just be one?
Let's go all the way back
No
around.
Way Out. It was
No Way Out.
That's
Right.
right. That was
Horny ass movie.
Yeah, very horny movie. That very kind of strikingly, like illegally.
You're
so.
just like, Jesus, Kevin.
A movie so horny that they made it today, they'd throw you in jail.
They would throw you in jail. Don't fucking cab. Get home.
Look at this run, though. Okay, No Way Out, 87. 88, Feds. 89, Fat Man and Little Boy.
Yeah,
then 1993 movies. He does Hunt for Red October, Days of Thunder, Die Hard 2. 1991, he's in 5 movies.
Right.
Like, the man's just gaining steam.
Right.
Because if you watch him do this for one scene, you're like, well, yeah, let's buy that and put it in our movie.
And then he becomes a Tennessee senator. He's a fairly mediocre senator from all, like, as far as I know.
He's just like a standard, generic Republican.
Rubber stampy guy. Retires, goes back to be on Law and Order, and then some idiot is like, you should run for president. Yep.
Well, it was, what's interesting about the presidential, and I was trying to find a way to articulate this on social media.
It's 08. It's the one that McCain wins.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's 08. And so Bush, Bush, it's in the Bush's term, but there's still a thought that sort of like maybe the secret sauce to winning a national election was like kind of being a folksy Southerner, right?
Yes.
Because like
Right.
you got Bill Clinton. I mean, basically for 20 years, it's like Bill Clinton, Al
Bush.
Gore, who almost became president,
He sure did.
and then Bush. So you got these folksy Southerners.
Mm-hmm.
And just like, well, both Republicans and Democrats are like, well, maybe you should just like put up a folksy Southerner. So Democrats had John Edwards from North Carolina,
so folksy.
and
And a straight shooter, that guy.
a straight shooter, yeah, not at all a scumbag. And then, which I say that, and I voted for him.
Really? In 08?
I was an Edwards guy in 08.
Yeah, he had that populist energy. It was the moment
I was
where
as well. Yeah,
I was an Obama kid. I was. I mean, I was one of those delusional.
And I was like, Obama
kids who
can't
turned
win.
out to
They're
be
not.
right.
They're not going to.
Right.
They're not going to like.
I was like the plucky 22-year-old or whatever.
The Edwards thing fell apart hard, and I do think part of it was the calculation of like, quote, is this more realistic to get behind this guy? But
and he had Clinton-y vibes.
Right.
To America's man.
I ended up on his. I don't know what triggered this, but I ended up on his Wikipedia for like an hour the other
Johnny
night.
Edwards?
Yeah, where I was like, I want to relive
John.
this spiral.
I mean, remember, of course, he'd been the vice presidential nominee, and people thought that meant he might be the standard bearer. You know, the next
handsome,
guy.
great on the stump. Like,
Yes,
Yeah.
great on this. Like, you understand it's what you're getting at with Fred Thompson, where you're like, this guy is fucking incredible on television.
Right.
And Fred Thompson was the test of that. We're like, let's get a folksy guy. How about we get the guy who both has political history and also plays this type of guy in movies
Like, yeah.
and TV, and when he does it, everyone loves that.
literally an actor. But the other guy who fit this type was Virginia Senator George Allen, who is widely thought to be kind of like the heir apparent or one of the heirs apparent
That is
to Bush.
I forgot ever existed.
Remember that word he said?
I may have mentioned this on the show.
Wow.
The kid who said that to lived in my dorm in college.
Wow. Because he was, of course, a Virginia politician. Yes.
So it was it was like a type. It was like a type of thing. We can get
that word he said.
a folksy. He called a dude monkey.
Yes.
I mean, it's
No,
just,
but in like
in
Portuguese.
Right. It's sort of it somehow it would have been less racist had he just been like, "You're a monkey."
It would have at least been like, the problem was it was days of people being like, what did he say and what on earth did he mean by it? And
Right.
even he had to be like, I don't know, man. I don't know. It just came out of my mouth. Like, I don't know what to
What
tell
he
you.
But
said
it's like
took
there-
more effort and then took more litigation on the part of everyone else to figure out what it was.
But there's this thing with like racism, right? Where
Which, by the way, I don't like.
bad.
I just want to say this
It's
on
not
the
great.
record.
Thumbs down.
I'm a noted opponent. But sometimes, and maybe this is just me as like a Southerner and someone who grew up in the South. There's like ordinary casual racism, which isn't great, but it's also like quite thoughtless and like non-ideological, and it's just sort of like, okay, you're kind of just an asshole.
Right.
You're repeating stuff. But then there's things people say that like indicate like a kind of deeper, like it's like
Right,
nerd.
you've read some book with skull measurements in it or
Right,
something.
right.
And you're like, this
what
is
the
like
hell's going
racism
on
with like a
here?
measure of craft. Like you're really honing what you want to say and,
And
how
that's
to
what the
say
George
it.
Allen thing was.
Right.
Sort of like, you're not just calling him a slur, but it's
Right.
like it's a slur in a foreign language. It's like it came very naturally to you.
It's kind of singer, not the song racism.
Yeah, it's like this is really weird that
Yeah.
that's the word that
George
came to
Allen,
mind
man.
for you.
I completely
And
memory
then, of course, he
hold
loses re-election
to
and
Jim Webb
does not run for
in
president.
06.
Yeah,
Jim Webb, another
normal
folksy, normal guy, totally normal.
normal.
Another kind of folksy Southerner, less folksy, more sort of like hardened, but
He's kind of a Tom Clancy guy.
Yeah.
Like, I know he was a Democrat, but he was sort of like a marginal Democrat, and he was served in the military and
the last
straight
thing
shooter.
I'll say on this note is that what's interesting about this affect from Southern politicians is that I think it does like reflect this, much longer than the rest of the country. The South still had this sort of like barn burner tradition of like campaigning, and so there's just like there's a style of campaigning that was still kind of like in circulation in the South, really up until like the 80s and 90s. That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And the guys who try it now sound like idiots because it's clearly an affectation. John Kennedy in Louisiana tries to do the thing, but like you're like, oh, you went to Oxford. No one's buying this.
Right.
Well, like to build a bridge back to Red October, the thing that's so fascinating about Fred Thompson as an actor is that he is so weirdly internalized.
Yeah.
And it's not just in this movie, but even like the broader action thriller movies he was doing. What was fascinating about him was he's a real like makes the audience come to him actor for a guy who can get up there and fucking stump.
But
and
his
like
face
play to
isn't
the
all
cheap
red. He's
Right,
not
no.
like he's like
And as you said, it's like the turning point of the movie is him just with such ease, offhandedly being like, "No, Jack Ryan knows what he's talking about." You know, like he can't even be bothered to get wild up to make the case.
This is a movie where Sean Connery plays a Russian sea captain.
Yes.
And yet I don't think anyone in the movie is over the top.
No.
yeah.
Like that's surprising.
Yes.
And it's a movie with actors like Tim Curry, Alec Baldwin, people who can go over the top. Like it's not like they don't have it in them. And it's directed by McTiernan, coming off of Predator and Die Hard, both of which are much more kinetic movies
Yes.
that are crazier and louder than this movie.
Before I saw this film, just seeing the VHS box, right? Okay, this is a Tom Clancy movie. It's Baldwin and Connery. That's what I know. And at some later point, I read the entire supporting cast list, and I remember having the thought as like a teenager of like, how could all of these performers be in one movie
Right.
and not be clashing up against each other? You cannot put that group of people, even if they're not sharing scenes. Tim Curry cannot coexist with James Earl Jones,
Right.
with Connery as a submarine captain, whatever. And as you said, like everyone is doing not just the sort of the most reserved version of what they could do,
That's exactly what it is.
but one that is totally in sync with the movie and the other performers. Like he's cast everyone very strategically for what their innate quality is, but pitched them all perfectly at the exact same level.
Courtney B. Vance, I think, is a great example of exactly this. Someone who is doing the most down-tempo version of the thing that he does,
Right.
but that is still distinctively him.
Yes.
And fits completely well with it. Like, of course, the open when we meet him for the first time, you say, it was not Paglagucci. It was like that's exactly what that guy would be like,
Yes.
and it's entirely believable, and it's dynamic. And like you're like, oh, who's this actor? Right? You're like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
But you're right, Griffin. It's never too much, but it's always precisely what that actor can do very well.
Yes. Yeah, and you're the only guy who's doing too much, as we've discussed, is Baldwin, which is appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he could do more. He's not like Glenn Gary up
No,
there.
no,
you know?
no.
Like he's not like he could go crazier.
Can we do a little Baldwin sidebar? Because I was really thinking
We've
on this while
talked-
watching.
I'll
Well,
just
this
say,
is
we've
the
talked
point-
about him a lot in this era, just in that we've done Beetlejuice and Married to the Mob, and is that it? Maybe a third one?
I think there's a third one I'm forgetting. David, this is the exact point I wanted to make.
Yeah.
You recently on our Prince of Tides episode introduced the concept of the blank check Hall of Fame, which we're still kind of defining in real time.
Was I
right?
talking about Nolte in that?
You were talking about
Yeah,
Nolte.
Nick Nolte.
And you're
Great
talking
Nick
about
Nolte.
like people we have covered
A weird amount.
a weird amount in wildly different roles with different directors, where you're like, man, if you just take our Nick Nolte arc and you put fucking Hulk and Prince of Tides and Lorenzo's Oil and I'll Do Anything, that's a weird assemblage of roles, right?
Right.
Baldwin is one of those guys you could almost argue we should put in that tier, except Baldwin so weirdly, for a guy who doesn't disappear into roles, is always Alec Baldwin. When I try to zoom out and think about his career, I'm like, that's 8 different guys. The eras of Baldwin are so bizarre and distinct. And that's even if we remove like Baldwin the man from it, which is its own additional like 10 eras of extreme drama and highs and lows.
Yeah.
Just looking at him as an actor, it is hard to be like, even within just a 5-year span, Beetlejuice guy, Married to the Mob guy, Red October guy, same guy. Let alone that you get to 25 years later, he's the same guy who's in the 2 Mission Impossibles.
He sure is. You made a terrible choice, and I just get to his line from Fallout. It is interesting to look at his career, which he follows this up with Miami Blues, does some supporting stuff in like Alice, Glengarry, obviously. He pops like crazy in that.
Yeah.
And you're like, man, this guy hasn't made. And then it's like Malice, The Getaway, The Shadow, The Juror, Heaven's Prisoners.
He basically,
it's this like just runs into a wall.
He does a run of the exact thing he said he was avoiding up until this movie. The types of movies that would offer me the leading role are the third tier projects.
Which
I'd
is
rather
what
be
those all are.
the supporting guy. But after he's done this, he's like, I guess I gotta be the guy at the center of the poster.
Like to the point that when he is in the cooler, it truly is like, oh shit, Alec Baldwin. Like he can act. I forgot about that.
And that was
He's got like total presence.
He breezed
That's
to
like
an Oscar
10 years
nomination.
later. He did. Yeah.
I think if we watch that today, we'd be like, this is like the 4th best performance he gives in any year.
You're just like, oh, he's just like doing Jack Donaghy basically. But it's like, yeah, but that was exciting.
That was coming off an era where he had like 5-6 years of being a terrible leading man and then started to like bulk up.
And then he's doing like Thomas the Tank Engine.
Well, this is what I was saying.
Then he's just like taking
But
Jack.
it's also,
he's doing a voice in Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within.
Oh,
and I just remember my dad being like, why is Alec Baldwin hosting SNL again? And I was like, he's weirdly good at this. My dad was like, but who cares about him as a movie star anymore? And then he would pop up as like the boss in one scene of a comedy. And he'd be like, fuck, he's good at this.
Yeah.
There's that period where he doesn't totally want to own just being a comedy actor.
A husky comedy.
But it was the only thing that he was ever like popping at. And then Cooler was the one time in that run where it was like, he knows his new body. He's bringing the energy from the comedies to a drama. I've also just been...
It goes right to 30 Rock.
I've been rewatching 30 Rock the last couple of weeks.
It's an incredible performance.
Yes. And it's just watching this in the middle of a 30 Rock run is wild to put in perspective.
Yeah, it's like 2 different, it's like effectively 2 different people.
Yes.
The scene where he does Cosby and then a bunch of other offensive stereotypes in trying to counsel Tracy Jordan. And then Tracy Jordan's like, do like my 2nd grade teacher. And then he does like a sort of like, like does that. And Tracy Jordan's like, hey, we don't need to resort to stereotypes. It's one of the, you couldn't do it today or whatever.
It's not an episode
very funny.
I love, but the 100th episode with the gas leak where it becomes a sort of hallucinatory clip show.
Yes.
But the whole underlying part of it is they need to put on their 100th episode. The Cabletown guy maybe wants to cancel the show. I swear all of this is relevant. And they're trying to get Tracy back on the show or else the show will get canceled.
Sure.
And it's after he's won an Oscar and has gotten too legitimate and hates that he's now seen as a pillar of like society.
Yes.
And wants to lower his reputation again. And he's like complaining to Jack Donaghy at a rooftop at the end of this episode. Like, how do I get people to stop taking me seriously? I've tried everything. I go on the talk shows. I say the offensive thing. I do something bad in public. It all seems to go my way. And Baldwin gives this monologue where he's like, it's easy. Go on television. And he's like, what? And he's like, the way to lower yourself back to television is to be on television. Television delegitimizes anyone.
Right.
And then gives a speech where he's like, even if you were a star. And then Donaghy relays Baldwin's career arc.
Of course. Yes.
With full intensity. And he like puts extra like fucking mustard on it when he's outlining the like Hunt for Red October part of it. And in that moment, you're like, right, I have to accept this has all been the same.
It's the same guy. And it's like, that was his moment to vault the ladder.
Yeah.
And he didn't really do it. And then it was just this long decline.
Yeah.
Now he's in a different phase of his life.
I can't even think of what the joke is to make about.
Yes.
But no, I just think I think the narrative became so much he failed. They gave him the shot to be Jack Ryan and they replaced him with a bigger movie star. He wasn't up to par, right? And then the stories become conflicting. Well, he was already committed to do Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway. I dropped out of my own volition. And then it was like, no, they kind of went behind his back.
Yeah.
and they just got wiggled out of the contract.
The true story now seems to be Harrison Ford saw Hunt for Red October and was like, I do want to do that.
Right. Yeah.
Calls them and is like, I will play Jack Ryan. And they're like, great, cool. Alec Baldwin can go into a garbage can for all we care if Harrison Ford wants to play Jack Ryan. And that's what they do.
Yes.
And they screw him out. And yes, they have cover story of like, oh, well, he was committed to do a play. I'm like, I think you could have worked around him doing a play. Yeah.
Fuck. Give me 1 second to find this quote because it's in the dossier.
About this?
This is for Baldwin, okay? It's to your exact point.
The currency quote?
He says, for newcomers, the train pulls out at 12:01.
Yeah.
You're on it or you're not. The greatest plateau in Hollywood is when they hold the train for you. Yeah. I think that's exactly what you're saying, where he was committed to do this play.
Yeah.
Ford expressed interest, and they were like, oh no, if we're going to film, we have to film at the time the play.
Harrison Ford is available, though, so we'll see you later.
We can't wait for you.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Because like Harrison Ford in Air Force One might as well be Jack Ryan. That's a more action-packed movie.
Yes.
But it might as well just be what if Jack Ryan became president and then some terrorists hijacked his plane.
Yeah.
I mean, for all I know, that does happen in a Jack Ryan novel. There's a lot of them. I'm not in charge of this.
Can we talk about the Russian choice and the translation moment, which is just one of the most audacious things this movie does.
I love it.
It does it so simply, and you're like, why do no other films pull this off this well?
For 5 minutes.
Yes.
And then you zoom in on, is it Peter Firth's mouth? One of their mouths.
Yes.
When they say the word Armageddon.
Which is the same in both languages.
And then when we zoom out, everyone's speaking English.
I think, not to be persnickety, I think it's not even a zoom, it's like a dolly in.
Right, yeah.
But it's without cuts. It's a classic McTiernan thing of like, you're in this conversation, the camera slowly starts to track in on this guy's
like,
mouth.
What's going on?
He gets to the word, why is there so much emphasis on this? And then after Armageddon, he's speaking in English and the camera slowly pulls back and it's like, you've shifted reality of this scene.
You've entered their brains or whatever, which makes the then twist of them speaking Russian at the end of the movie hit hard.
Yes.
Where you're like, right. I mean, it's like the unspoken thing of all Star Trek, where it's like they're actually all speaking their own languages and there's just a computer making everyone sound the same.
But it's what I was saying in the Die Hard episode about like the degree to which so much of McTiernan's technique is like magic tricks.
Yeah.
Where it's like he's making it feel like a twist at the end of the movie. The reveal that, oh, yes, they are Russian.
They were Russian.
A thing you know, and that we've all just been in agreement to accept the reality of hearing them in English.
Now, the plot of the film seems more complicated than it is because it really is just like the sub is going in one direction.
Right.
And everyone in America is arguing about where it is and what it wants to do.
Is this an offensive attack?
And finally, in the middle of the movie, Jack Ryan convinces someone like, I know what he wants to do. He wants to defect. Get me onto the sub that is near him.
Right.
And we are going to figure this out.
Yes.
And that is when the film shifts more from boardroom talk to like, underwater tactics of like, let's send him a signal. Let's say like, hey, we think we know what you're doing. Just let us know if we're right. And that's when Connery's character then has to basically get his crew off of the boat.
Yes.
So that he can defect. He can
also
enact the latter stage of his plan.
To call out that the USS Dallas is basically in between those 2 points. They're the buffer.
Dallas is the boat that's near the Red October. That's right.
Yeah.
Trying to figure it out. That's Scott Glenn, Courtney B. Vance, fucking Ned Vaughn, who's one of those guys who's in everything. He's the sort of red hair guy.
Yes.
The guy's in everything. But it is a lot of, chat and conversation and subtle diplomacy, I guess, right? Like,
yeah.
What are some other scenes you guys want to mention? I don't know.
We talked about this a lot, obviously, with Dead Reckoning, that I called out months before we were actually doing this series, that I felt like McQuarrie was really kind of doing McTiernan style in the dialogue scenes of that movie, right?
Okay, sure.
And it opens up with a submarine scene, so it's like a pretty easy comparison point.
Right.
But I was like, there's something to the way that in these long dialogue scenes where people in boardrooms have to like dump a bunch of exposition, he is shooting this like it's an action movie and not in the way Michael Bay does where he's adding a ton of flash.
Right. Cameras going all around.
Where it's truly just style poured on top of it. And then one of the Empire McQuarrie interview episodes recently, he said this thing about like why he jumps the line in some of the dialogue scenes in Dead Reckoning and what the intent was of his camera movement and cutting between shots where the camera was moving in opposite directions. And he said this thing that I have to imagine was McTiernan's strategy here, especially knowing the way he talked about how he studied shot lengths and movements for Die Hard and everything, which is McQuarrie's like, I basically find that if you have characters dumping a bunch of exposition, every 10 seconds, the audience will check out. And they'll think they're listening and paying attention, but they're not.
Yeah.
And you have to do things cinematically to wake them up. Right. And so if you like jump the line, you're slapping them in the face. If you tilt the camera, if you have an aggressive camera move, the trick is to make those things feel kind of motivated and organic and not just like flashy for flash sake.
Right.
But it does feel like this whole movie is incredibly talky, and McTiernan is using every trick in the book to make every sentence feel important so that it lands with the impact of like a punch. Right?
Sure. Absolutely.
That's my big thesis.
I agree.
The American stuff is calmer, though. Like, there is more chit-chat there.
Yeah.
Like when Courtney B. Vance is like, I think I'm hearing something. Like, I thought I heard singing.
No, and his camera movement in this.
The captain isn't like, quiet, petty officer. Like, like he's like, all right.
But this is my point. He wants the performances to be quiet. So he's doing all of that through editing and camera movement.
Yeah.
And this, like, the camera fucking never stops moving in this movie.
The camera moves a lot. We should shout out to Jack Ryan, obviously. I do love him because he's afraid of flying.
Yeah.
Like me. He overcomes his fear of flying, obviously, at the end of the movie.
It should be a little bit of an inspiration to you.
Yeah, maybe it should be. But
I hear Jack Ryan's doing a lot of live shows these days in other cities.
He's
playing the music box here in
I have
Chicago.
a kid, not because I'm afraid of flying. What's the big daring sequence in the middle of the movie is him getting on the sub
With the static.
which seems hard.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it.
Like, this seems like a huge pain in the ass.
My choice would be to not even try.
And the sub is like, we got to go up now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the people on the sub themselves were like, why are you doing this?
Right. Like, we already had him, basically. Like, you distracted us by making us come pick you up. But then once he's there, I mean, so like Jack Ryan's big gambit is that he guesses he's going to turn starboard.
Uh-huh.
Right. And when he does correctly guesses that, Scott Glenn is impressed.
Sure.
And he later reveals he just guessed.
Right.
It was going to be one or the other.
Yep.
And he had to win him over. That's like the sort of essence of Jack Ryan, I guess, beyond just like he reads a lot of. It's like he has a little bit of maverick in him.
A little magic.
He'll do these he'll do these kind of like out on a limb things that kind of, distinguish him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Ben was calling out how this felt like a perfect watch for rainy January when we're recording this. Muggy, foggy, gross January.
Kind of unseasonably warm, but it's a very much a wet, rainy day.
Yep.
Yes.
And so I woke up and started watching this at like 10 o'clock, and it was just like truly like perfect.
Yep.
I want to call out nautical film takes place on the seas, right? A lot of it is it's a damp flick.
I wouldn't say it was on the seas. It's
under the seas.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The score for this movie was done by a hot crustacean band.
It was done by Sebastian. That's right.
It was actually
not
done by
Basil Polidorus.
Who's the fucking
The best. I mean, the score for this movie is amazing. Who's better than Russians at singing in unison? They're the best.
Boys to Men?
Oh, they were pretty good.
Yeah. This movie was shot by Jan de Bont.
Yeah.
Is this the final McTiernan de Bont collaboration?
I would assume so, because I don't think
then-
Jan de Bont shot Medicine Man.
No, and then de Bont's making his own things.
Yeah. I mean, after this, Jan de Bont goes on to shoot Lethal Weapon 3 and Basic Instinct. Heard of it?
Yep.
And then obviously makes Speed in 1994.
This movie looks incredible.
Yes.
It is so fucking dark in a way that is like audacious.
Yep.
And de Bont said that his big thing was that he like didn't want to fake what the lighting would be in a submarine and had them build it to how it would be, which is real submarines do this thing of having the different colored lights at different times so people can starve off madness.
Right. They feel like there's changes in the day. Yeah.
That's a real thing.
The red, blue, white thing is you need to differentiate between times of day and demarcate the days and the cycles, or else people go insane.
My guess is it's gotten more complex now. I assume submarines now are even more attuned to this sort of stuff.
But he was like, build it the way it would be, and I'll figure out how to shoot around that. I don't want to like sneak and hide other lights in. And he basically was like, to this point of like ways to keep the audience's attention. He was like, if you have less light on a movie star's face, the audience pays more attention to what they're saying.
Sure.
If their face is fully lit in a classical movie star way, the audience pays attention to how they're saying it. And this is not a movie of like clever line readings.
No.
You know, it's a movie of you need to understand the points of what they're articulating. So he was like, the most effective thing you can do is put half of Sean Connery's face in shadow. And if it's harder to see Sean Connery, they pay more attention to the actual meat of what he's saying.
When you see Stellan Skarsgård in this film, who you only glimpse briefly,
I'd say you barely see him.
who is, of course, the sort of Soviet sub-captain who's been sent to destroy Connery, it literally looks like he's just like in hell. Like
Yes.
it's just red. And he's like, you see only half his face.
Yeah.
It's the perfect choice. Like he's just this like demon chasing them. And you don't even get the sense that he's a bad guy. He's just following orders probably, right? Like he's not like maniacal or anything, but he's so scary.
But it's also this McTiernan thing we keep coming back to, which is like the guy was so fucking good with ensemble casts, dealing with like many, many characters and casting them so well where it's just like people with very different faces and different vibes so that you're not getting them confused.
Right.
This is a movie where so many versions of this, the 15 supporting guys are all indistinguishable from one another. And for a movie that visually does not display their faces very clearly, you are very capable of keeping track of who's who and what's what.
Yeah. So, you know, Jack Ryan gets on the ship. He signals to them. Ramius is sort of surprised to realize that they've guessed his plan, I guess. But so because of a plucky Jack Ryan, of course. And they basically accept the offer via Morse code pings. I mean, like that is right. Like everything beyond that is just him wrapping it up. The whole fake emergency, the surfacing of the sub, leaving everybody in the emergency vessels. And it should go off without a scratch, except for the fucking chef turns out to be a, KGB guy.
agent.
Yeah.
GRU or something.
GRU. Yes. That is the, whatever. That era is KGB. And that's the one action sequence in the movie is chasing him through the sub with guns. Like that's about it.
It's like barely an action sequence.
Yeah.
Like you get the initial gunfire. Sam Neill's character gets
He
killed.
gets the best line in the movie.
I would have liked to have seen Montana.
Incredible.
It's very sad.
He's gonna have a round wife who catches him rabbits and cooks them.
That earlier scene where
His
like
whole like fantasy of American life.
Neil's the one guy
nice. It
that
does. It sounds
Connery's
great.
looping in on everything he's thinking. And there's that scene where Neil just so perfectly plays this incredibly stoic, emotionally closed off man trying to describe his dream life in America that is just kind of like complacency. It is just like banality. American banality seems like the most exciting thing in the world to him.
Pickup truck, round wife, rabbit.
I mean, the thing that always strikes me about that scene too is he's like, I don't think we need a pass to leave this
That
state.
fucking thing. You can just drive from state to state and you don't need a pass and you don't need approval.
Yeah.
It's very touching.
It's like it's in a movie, like as I've been saying, that is very sympathetic to the Russian sailors. It is maybe sort of like the most quietly sort of like, this is what makes America great.
And it's an early scene. Right. It's like 15, 20 minutes in before we've really built
it's early in the film for
Jack
sure.
Ryan out. I mean, that's the other funny thing about this being the movie that like all the hopes are pinned on this being Baldwin's transformative A-list leading man moment. They talk about when they were adapting the book, there's like a run of 150 straight pages that Jack Ryan is not in.
Right.
That Tom Clancy goes into his corridors and whatever. Even in its current form where they were trying to, pre-Connery, construct the movie with more of an emphasis on Jack Ryan, it is moving between the three camps, as we're saying, primarily, right? Like the Dallas, whoever Ryan's talking to, and why am I forgetting the name of the Russian submarine now? The Red October. Jesus fucking Christ.
Relax.
Not to mention like the backroom conversations after Jack Ryan's, like your Fred Thompson scenes or whatever. It is a movie that will go like 10 plus minutes without seeing your leading man. Which is what's cool about it is that it's so much more ensemble-y than you would imagine it to be.
Yes.
But it does make you feel like if Kevin Costner were in this, would he pop harder or would the movie just morph itself more around making him more traditionally heroic.
It seems like if Kevin Costner in this movie, it would become a Kevin Costner movie. Like you'd lose the moment with Sam Neill. Like you'd lose some of this stuff that builds out these other characters and kind of builds out the stakes a bit more for everyone.
The greater good of the film.
Right.
Yeah.
There's my co-host John Gans has a fun theory about this movie because we watched this movie and then I think the same year we watched Under Siege,
Probably. Similar time.
Which
Both
is
movies, obviously.
Yeah, both movies. And he hates Steven Seagal, but that's sort of besides the point for this anecdote.
He hates his art, but likes him as a person.
Yeah,
right?
of course. Yeah. Weirdly, actually.
Yeah, loves his personal life and his political beliefs.
But the thing about Under Siege is in Under Siege, you have the terrorists take over the ship, and Steven Seagal is like this singular person who is able to save the ship. And although others work with him, in the end, it's sort of like a celebration of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the compelling things about Red October is it's really none of that. Right, like Jack Ryan does know what's going down, but he is not able to accomplish anything without the assistance of other people. Like all the resolution of the problems that are confronted are done collectively.
Yeah.
Yes,
it's true. The most impressive thing Jack Ryan does is shoot the cook, but that's just it gets him with a gun, and he pulls the trigger. But like that's it. There's not this is all for one for all kind of stuff. The big moment is Scott Glenn dipping the sub so that the torpedo hits Skarsgård instead of them.
I mean, this running thread across like doing a whole miniseries on
really
McTiernan. Cool it fucking rules.
Oh, and then the guy's like, you arrogant fool, you've killed us.
Great.
This running thread of like McTiernan's clear distaste for other action movies, right?
Sure.
That all these movies he makes are almost in opposition to be like, no, this is how you should be doing it. This is the responsible way of making this, or the intelligent way of making this. It is fascinating how often his movies kind of avoid the like lone man tropes of storytelling. And even Die Hard, which looks like that on its face, isn't really. Like it is so much about, well, it's one guy in a building, one good cop who gets it right. But also it's like, no, it's the collaboration with everyone else. He's isolated, but it is also still about partnership. And like Predator is a movie where a guy loses his team and it seemingly like dies inside,
Yeah, he goes crazy at the end.
Right. That even though he's a guy who makes these like star vehicles that are about like these iconic action heroes, casting like the biggest leading men, they're always very like about a collective and people's like exchanges with each other.
Should I see Below? It's a sub movie I've never seen. I was
Below?
trying to think of like sub movies I haven't seen. Below.
That's the David Towie one?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that one.
I've ever seen. I think Zach Galifianakis is in that
He
movie.
sure is.
No, it's a good one. A recent one, The Wolf's Call.
I need to see that
It's
one.
a French one.
I've heard that's good, and I want to check it out. I
It's a lot
believe
of
it's
fun.
on Netflix.
You know what's surprisingly good? We were talking about Gerard Butler earlier. Hunter Killer.
All right, I'm just gonna watch in these. Yeah. So when that came out, it was like Gerard Butler and Gary Oldman in a sub movie. I was like, well, that sounds good.
It had also been on a shelf for like 12 years.
Right, but it also is it a Redbox movie? Because like those guys can go either way.
It
like,
was a Relativity media release that
I gotta check
stayed
it
on ice for like 5 years after the company went bankrupt. I think.
there's no way it's not at least pretty fun to watch those guys growl, like dive.
Jamelle's never been wrong about anything in his life, and he just told us it's good.
I've been wrong about plenty.
I'm also gonna have to watch the Undisputed straight to video sequels, which I
But
recommended.
Hunter Killer is it's like it's totally fine, TNT on a Sunday kind of movie.
I mean, that's the thing. Gerard's the only guy who makes that kind of movie anymore.
I mean, what? Am I supposed to go watch Sundance premieres on my, TV? No, I'm gonna watch Hunter Killer from 5 years
Hunter
ago.
Killer, Plane, Kandahar.
One of those movies where half the credits on Wikipedia don't even have pages. Like,
Linda Cardellini, The Heart of Green Book is in it. Common, Michael Nyqvist.
the submarine runs on her energy.
Of course.
She's spinning around in a centrifuge.
She's the heart of the submarine.
Yeah, she's the heart of the submarine.
Yeah.
Film ends with them, this sort of like this exciting torpedo sequence, but very what feels like it's trying to be accurate.
Mhm.
It's really just a lot of like go 30 degrees this way.
Yeah.
like rather than like crazy countermeasures and like visuals of torpedoes exploding and all that. The one big visual is Skarsgård's submarine exploding, which is cool.
Yes.
But then after that, it's like, great, let's go to Maine, have one conversation, and then Jack Ryan can bring a teddy bear home to his daughter.
Yeah.
And sleep on a plane.
But also, as we said, like, this is a movie that has expensive special effects that were hard to achieve. And even still, the goal is like, make it look realistic. It would be dark down there and hard to see what it is.
Yeah, I mean, this film was not nominated for its special effects. It won for sound effect editing. It
got nominated for editing and sound. Yeah.
Yes, but obviously this is the year of like Total Recall, which has like insane special effects.
Yep.
You know, like that are like next level leaps. You know,
that's the thing about this movie. It's like it has expensive, complicated special effects that are pretty unshowy and quiet.
Yeah. It cost $35 million. That's a good budget. It's not an insane one. And I think a lot of it went to Connery and a lot more went to building the sets. Like, I think the sets are really like expensive. And it made, there was this fear when it came out of like, is this, like you say, is this old hat? Like the Berlin Wall has fallen. No, I mean, it was recent history, obviously still interesting.
Hit.
It was a big hit. Thank you, Griffin. $120 million domestic.
I'm just going to say 2 words there. A big hit.
Should we play the box office game, or is there anything else we need to discuss?
Jamelle, anything else?
October.
I don't think there's. I don't have anything else.
Great.
It's a great movie.
Yeah,
what else is to say?
You should check it out. It's a great film, and it opened #1 on March 2nd, 1990. Griffin. So like the time the Oscars of the previous year are happening. That's the other reason it's less of a prestige
That's true.
film. It's coming out a year before the
Right.
Oscars.
They didn't even put it in a summer blockbuster slot, but it was one of the highest grossing films of 1990.
So it opens to $17 million, and number 2 is the film that is about to win Best Picture at the Oscars.
From 89, which is Dances with Wolves?
Nope.
No, that's this
going
year.
to win in a year from
Rain Man?
Nope.
Fuck. That's 88?
Yep.
Fuck. 89.
It's not Oscar's finest hour. I'll put it that way.
Okay. And it's not... Oh, it's...
Scent of a Woman.
It's Driving Miss Daisy.
It's Driving Miss Daisy.
It's Driving Miss Daisy.
Yeah.
A huge is actually too strong, but a very big hit considering it's about a guy driving an old lady around.
Yeah.
Made $106 million.
Look, the title didn't lie. That is what the movie's about.
It is still so insane to me that Driving Miss Daisy wins the Oscar.
Yes.
Sort of like the opposite of Do the Right Thing.
Yes.
Like just
the same year.
Total ideological opposite. And then what, like 30 years later, it's like,
Green Book.
let's do this
Black
again.
Klansman. The classic matchup.
Let's do this once again.
It's a car again. It's another.
But this time,
Miss
Miss Daisy is the black man.
Right. And they're like, well, we got to
And the
give this one an Oscar.
I've already done a Green Book joke on this podcast. I won't do it again. But the driver is a spicy Italian man.
This is,
Very spicy.
it was radical.
Spicy, yes.
People don't understand how radical
this is
that
the best
movie
fried
was.
chicken
when it
I've
came
ever had. Hey. It's funny. I don't know if you guys spend any time on TikTok, but that movie, that thing on TikTok is people like will chop up movies and like post them in like 5 minute things.
Is Green Book big on TikTok?
It is weirdly big on TikTok.
Oh boy.
And you'll go into the comments and people are like, man, this is a great movie. This is a great movie. Just wonderful messages, this movie.
Were we talking about this with Wags, David? But just like how weirdly big Green Book was
In China. We were talking about
and
this.
France.
Well, you know what?
Where you're like,
You
you
ever seen a
expect
French
we import
comedy?
that, we export that over to other countries, and they're like, you gave this shit Best Picture, and other countries liked it more than we
Have
did.
you ever seen a French comedy?
I
You
have. Bienvenue le chutis.
They have Green Book vibes.
They do. You're right.
The joke is
their number one genre.
is Green Book vibe.
Yes.
Virtuoso. That's Italian for pretty good. That's the line I was trying to remember.
I'm so glad that you dug it up.
Number 3 at the box office. Speaking of this actor, it is an action film starring Steven Seagal.
Hard to Kill.
Nailed
Hard
it.
to Kill, which is what, his third?
Yeah, because his first one is
Above the Law?
Above the Law. It's Above the Law, Out for Justice, Hard to Kill.
Uh-huh.
Great titles.
And
They really are all kind of so good.
Marked
yeah,
for
Steven
Death.
Seagal is Above the Law.
Yes.
Steven Seagal is Marked for Death.
That's what's smart about the titles.
And then-
They're all set up the ...
Right.
then the title.
They tell you about the man.
Yeah.
In 92, he gets under siege, and it's sort of like, oh, he's like a little more
He
than
leveled
just
up.
like
This is-
a cop who beats people up in this one.
And Under Siege was a huge hit.
It was a huge
Yes.
hit. It's a good
huge
movie.
hit.
I mean, it's stupid, but it's a good movie.
Yeah,
What?
No,
You
he
haven't
said that
even
about-
seen it.
He said that about Under Siege, not Under
I
Siege
did
2.
finally-
Oh, you
see
did
it.
finally see it. Okay, good for you.
I loved Under Siege 2. Never saw 1 until probably like 2 years ago.
Under Siege 2 is a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
rules.
dude, they're on a fucking train.
They are on a train. And they do go into dark.
And
territory.
then so you get Under Siege, and then actually I think the next film that's released in Seagal's career is On Deadly Ground,
yes,
which is
His
That's
magnum
where-
opus. His
it's where you start to see some cracks in the facade for sure.
I know we just did the March Madness and decided, but
Yeah.
should we do a Seagal?
No.
Yeah,
Entry?
here's
Cover all the Seagals?
Here's my idea. We just yesterday settled both brackets for main feed and Patreon.
Yeah.
My pitch is throw them both out.
Yep.
Seagal on main feed, Seagal on Patreon.
Okay. So number 4 at the box office,
We just decree
Griffin,
it's both.
is a comedy
Yeah.
of the. There's a lot of these kinds of movies. This guy's a sitcom star.
Okay.
He's winning Emmys. He's a
Uh-huh.
big deal on this TV show. Can
Okay.
he do a movie?
It's not a dancing,
No.
but it's an 80s sitcom star.
Yeah, lesser than that, but he was
Lesser
certainly
than
a big deal, and I like him. And you know what?
Mm.
His female co-star is from Cheers.
So it's a Shelley Long movie?
No,
Fuck. It's not a Kirstie Alley.
it is.
Oh.
But she's not the star of the star. I mean, she's the co-lead. I
Okay.
guess. I've never seen this film.
Huh.
I don't think it was a big hit.
Kirstie Alley and a different sitcom star.
Yes.
Can you tell me which network the sitcom star was on?
I can tell you that you watched a lot of this sitcom recently. but
Is it a
that's
Larroquette?
John Larroquette.
It's a Larroquette and Kirstie Alley?
Correct.
Huh. There's the Larroquette Bronson Pinchot movie where one of them's like a psychic.
That's not this
I
movie.
know, I'm fucking process of elimination.
I don't know what that movie is, but it's not this one.
Okay.
Second Sight is that movie.
Thank you. This movie is called,
It's got a very generic name.
oh no. That's my guess.
It's called Madhouse.
Okay. Very generic.
They're a couple, and it looks like they have some house guests who are crazy.
And the house gets angry at them?
No,
Is
the
that
house
plot of-
guests. They have house guests.
Right, but I'm saying it's called Mad House. Is the house angry that they invited guests over to it?
Possibly.
It's like a sentient monster house type premise.
Don't think
right?
so.
Okay.
I think they just have some wild house
Well,
guests.
sounds like missed opportunity.
It does. Number 5 at the box office is probably the movie that people thought was going to win Best Picture for a while and wins Best Director.
Born on the 4th of July.
In the Drive Miss Daisy year. It's Born on the 4th of July.
Yeah.
Another big hit, but serious, very serious. movie.
It's a very serious movie.
I've
Never seen it actually.
It's a good film. I mean, it's not amazing. It's pretty good. Have you seen Born on the 4th of July?
never seen it. No.
Where do you stand on Stone? Are you a Stone guy? You like to get stoned?
Do I like this? I mean, I love JFK.
Yeah.
I think it's an insane movie.
Yeah, it's an old-fashioned men's movie.
An old-fashioned movie. I think JFK. I think to me, JFK must be like what it feels like to go through a drug-induced stupor.
Yeah.
But I do love it.
Do you like Nixon?
I like Nixon a lot.
Hell yeah. Even better, in my opinion.
That 1-2 punch of JFK and Nixon, I think, are terrific. But I'm otherwise quite lukewarm on Oliver Stone.
He's kind of out of fashion at this point. I wonder if we'll ever do him. He certainly fits
I
our-
like his later documentary work.
Of
I like
course.
just when he sits down and tries to redeem the souls of despots.
We've also got Men Don't Leave.
Yeah.
Jessica Lange, Arliss Howard. I
Okay.
mentioned that movie on this podcast before. Revenge, the Kevin Costner
Oh,
film.
sure.
What is that about?
I don't know. He's got
That's a Tony Scott, is it not?
Let's find out. Is it a Tony Scott film? It is.
Thank you.
Yeah, with Anthony Quinn, Madeline Stowe.
You know why I know that?
Why?
Because it's a classic weird Tarantinoism that he writes True Romance and then hears Tony Scott's interested in directing your script. And he went, the guy who did Revenge?
It's like, no, he's the guy who did Top Gun, you fucking twerp.
But he always in interviews was like, the reason I let Tony Scott do True Romance is because I liked Revenge.
Well, I should check out Revenge. It's a Scott I haven't seen.
Yeah.
And I should do it on Scott I hasn't seen.
You should.
Glory is number 8, another
Okay.
Oscar player of that
Yeah.
year. Steel Magnolias, another one.
Mhm.
Good film. And the Bette Midler comedy Stella. It's sort of a dramedy, I think.
I don't think that's how the title said, David.
Stella!
Thank you.
Also starring John Goodman. I know
She's nothing about that. Yeah.
She's a feisty woman working in a bar who
Is that a Stella Dallas remake?
gets pregnant.
Am I wrong about that?
Yes, it's a Stella Dallas remake.
It's a weird.
It's a Barbara Stanwyck
It's
movie.
like Only the Lonely. That era of them like remaking old Oscar bait films as studio comedies.
She gets knocked up, and then she's a single mom, and she meets a barfly played by John Goodman. Sounds pretty good.
Trini Alvarado.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's Red October season, baby. Everyone loves it.
Opens
it's
to
number
17
one for a month until Pretty Woman knocks it off.
It makes 130 domestic.
It makes 120 domestic, 200 worldwide.
I mean, good numbers.
Great numbers. Had crazy multiplier.
Yeah.
Back
So
in the
for
day.
McTiernan, this is what, 3 in a row
Correct.
Yes.
So he just has to fuck it up.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, right, this movie successfully launches a franchise that basically has no relation to this movie.
Right.
Like James Earl Jones is the only carryover. The director doesn't return. The star doesn't return.
Yes. But like for McTiernan, it's like off of this, he does Medicine Man.
Yeah.
That doesn't do well, but people can kind of sort of be like, well, it was a smaller movie and whatever. It didn't really hurt anyone's feelings. Then he does Last Action Hero.
Right.
And that's the kind of noxious bomb he has to then retreat to do Die Hard with a Vengeance as a sort of like reset.
Remember what you all like about me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will be interested to hear what you guys think about Last Action Hero. That is a movie I like quite a bit.
Okay.
I like it a lot.
Spoilers for episode. Good.
but that episode is mostly us discussing how good is it? Like, is it great? Is it flawed? Like, what works, what doesn't? It was a very interesting episode. We've already recorded it.
I can totally see why the reaction was what the reaction was.
Yeah, at the time it was cooking with weird new gas that people didn't understand.
When I saw it when I was 15, like 10 years after it had come out and bombed, I was like, this is frustrating. And I should like this. And then I rewatched it and it was like, no, this is good and it's interesting. And I wish we had this kind of, we were talking about this pre-record.
Yeah.
This type of mess you miss.
Yeah. Yeah.
A personal mess. A mess with character.
So that's it. Yeah. We're going to go to Medicine Man from here. We've recorded that episode.
Yeah. It's just what the doctor prescribed.
Yes. No one raises their voice in that one either, right? Everyone's very subtle.
No, that's a movie with two very normal voices at the center.
Who's the co-star?
Lorraine Bracco!
Oh
Get
my.
out of the jungle! What are you doing here?
Lorraine Bracco, an actress I often like. Not her best work.
No. Let's be clear. That was specifically an impression of Lorraine Bracco in Medicine Man. If what you heard us do just now sounded mean, wait until you watch Medicine Man.
It's going to feel forgiving.
It's going to feel like Tim Curry in Hunt for Red October.
Yeah, exactly.
Understated.
Wow, he's not uncorking it at all.
Jamelle,
Take us out.
Unclear and Present Danger.
Yes.
Yes. My podcast on Clear and Present Danger with John Gans.
Got a Patreon.
We got a Patreon. We cover movies basically like the Hunt for Red October.
Hell yeah.
Most recent episode that should be up relatively soon after this record is Executive Decision. We're moving chronologically. This is the important thing about the podcast. It's moving chronologically through the 90s. And so we're currently in 1996.
Yes.
Which is a good fun year because we'll have Independence Day later on. We should get through 97 this year as well, which will get us to Air Force One.
Oh,
we're kind of in like prime 90s action film territory. And then on Patreon, we do kind of like classic Cold War movies that we just did Marathon Man. A great movie.
Yes. Very fun.
Had not seen in a long time. Very disturbing and unsettling dental torture scene.
Oh, yeah.
That is undoubtedly true. It's quite a lot. Is it safe? Is that what he says?
Yeah.
Is it safe?
Yeah.
And just like Dustin Hoffman's desperation, like
no, it's a really well acted scene.
it's like it's really unsettling.
I mean, famously, that's where Olivia told him, "Why don't you try acting?" But which is really funny. But they're both really good in that movie. Olivia's
that's what's fascinating about this scene is they're coming at it from different angles, and you're like, well, they're both effective. Am I wrong in thinking that this is Jamelle's 5th appearance?
What? Oh, let me look that up.
I almost let this slide by me. I mean,
there's Fiverr now
because
officially?
there's one Patreon appearance which is its own column. But
so I was on Vic Pinta, and the strafe of the Vic Pinta.
that was Patreon.
I think I gotta rewatch that movie.
I do too.
Because the thing about it is that it rocks, but it does have like campy classic stuff too. That's so good.
So that was the Patreon, but then
Ali,
Rosewood,
Rosewood,
Forrest Gump. Spider-Man 3.
No, this is your 6th episode.
This is my 6th
What?
episode.
Ali, Forrest Gump, Rosewood, Spider-Man 3, and Battling Butler in the General.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh.
So you're already a 5-timer.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, welcome to the 6-timers club.
Thank
What
you.
happens when you hit 99 on your show? Have you discussed this?
Well, so in
You turn 2 keys and something happens.
I don't know if I've discussed with John, but in my conception of the arc of the podcast, the actual last movie that falls into this type is The Sum of All Fears.
Right.
Oh, wow.
It
Right.
begins with The
Yeah.
Hunt for October. It ends with The Sum of All Fears. The Sum of
Yeah.
All Fears very much is a post-Cold War, these are the threats to the United States. It's terrorism, but it's not Middle Eastern terrorism. It's like Russia's unstable. It's like it's very post-Cold War to me. We will likely, assuming our friendship continues,
Yeah.
we will likely just keep moving through and
The 2000s.
do the 9/11 thing.
But
It's-
that, I
it's
was going to
fertile
say,
territory.
right.
The 2000s. The
Some of
political
All
thriller.
Fears is like the last one out of the gates that isn't influenced by 9/11.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
That's what's interesting about
and
it.
then they're all very much like 9/11
Yeah.
influence.
For
But
quite a while.
Right. I remember that being a movie where there was like consternation in the marketing of like, should we include this scene with the plane?
Yeah.
There's a shot of an explosion. And even though it wasn't about anything close to what had happened,
right.
people were still touchy about it. That's fascinating. Well, people should listen.
Yep.
And you can find me over at the New York Times, assuming you read it. If you don't, that's okay. It doesn't offend me.
Wait, I should send you an email updating you on how subscribed I am to the New York Times at all times.
Yeah. Do you write the crosswords at all? I do that a lot.
No, I do the Wordle every day.
Connections.
Hey.
Yeah.
All right, wrap it up. I gotta go back. Well, you
Okay.
can wrap it up. You can go to the bathroom.
Okay, David's going to the bathroom.
Yep.
Now we really get to have some fun. Thank you all for listening. I don't know. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you to Marie Barty, our associate producer. Thank you to Adrian McCann, production coordinator, and also editor on the show, along with Alex Barron. Thank you to JJ Birch for our research, Jumbo and Pat Reynolds for our artwork, Lane Montgomery and the Great American Novel for our theme song. You can go to blankcheckpod.com for links to some real nerdy shit, including Blank Check special features, our Patreon, where we do franchise commentaries. Right now, we're doing the Terminator movies. What's your overall sort of Terminator feeling?
I really like the Terminator movies.
Yeah.
I'm forgiving of most of them other than Terminator Genesis, which I think is just
Now,
like,
that's my fucking opinion.
yeah, I Genesis is the one where I'm just like, this is
Yes.
running on fumes and not very enjoyable. Like Terminator Salvation, not a good movie, has some cool visual stuff,
I agree.
like has some cool
I'm
concepts.
so
I
glad
enjoy
David's
it.
in the bathroom for this because we got into a fucking fight over this on mic.
But I feel like the Terminator franchise is a franchise that performs well below what it could be
Absolutely.
for reasons I don't quite understand. I thought Dark Fate was like, even though it was basically sort of like, what if we did T2 again?
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. And that's a good choice. That's
Yeah.
what they should have been doing the whole time.
But it's always been so strange to me that franchise, which is out the gate with two, phenomenal films,
Masterpieces. Yeah.
and it's not been able to figure out. And part of me wonders if it's just sort of like, it's so wedded. The franchise becomes so identified with Schwarzenegger that
Yes.
like, well, how do we fit Schwarzenegger into this?
That's a big problem.
And then they get too caught up in the lore. Like,
Yeah.
oh, what is the what's the timeline? What's the lore? When sort of like the thing that makes the franchise work, it's sort of like, no, these are glorified chase films, right?
Yes.
These are you are being chased by the scariest thing you can imagine,
yes.
and nothing you can do can kill it.
Yeah.
So
Let's talk about the Terminator, David.
let's
Good
turn
movie.
that. Let's right around that.
Yes. I will say, like, living in the time of watching the reboots happen over and over again, I found it frustrating to watch them fuck it up. And now that we're in a space where, like, Terminator's on ice and everyone stopped trying to make it happen, it has been very fun to do the commentary episodes and basically from a safe distance watch Sideshow Bob step on the rakes over and over again.
Yeah, seriously.
Like, that's what it becomes.
Yeah.
Of like, let me turn the other way. That's also a rake. I
I think I do have like a Terminator ranking, and like in my ranking, I think my third favorite Terminator thing is the Sarah Connor Chronicles.
Wow.
In part because I think it actually gets some of what works about Terminator, like not so much timeline stuff, but sort of like, oh, you're being chased by something that's unstoppable and will wants to kill you, and that's all it cares about.
Well, Jamelle, I love that. Thank you again for being here.
Oh, you're welcome.
And as always, it sounds like we now have to do all of the Sarah Connor Chronicles on Patreon, David.
Oh, God.